Hello and welcome to the CherrySTEM show number 2. Today we're going to be talking about sex and depression as well as stress, and we have my lovely co-host Richard Rall here with us, as well as our two wonderful guests, James Desborough and Kat Anomia. Say hello, peoples.
Hello,
Hello.
peoples.
Hello.
Only James did it right. All right, he can.
Wait, you said my name right. Isn't that such a rare thing? It's good.
Well, I did some educate. Well, I was educated a bit in the way of British English pronunciation of borough, so I'm wise up on that. All
Also,
right,
watch a lot of Doctor Who.
a lot of Doctor Who though. I don't think they ever said borough, did they? I mean, something
I'm sure they
happened.
did at some point.
Something happened in a
That and
borough
Sherlock.
I've
somewhere.
completely derailed. Come on, on track, focus.
Don't even talk to me about Sherlock. Okay, all right. Anyway, you and your Britishness, quit it. All right, so we are talking about gender differences in responses to stress as well as responses to depression and the way depression is internalized or externalized and experienced by men versus women. So basically, for the longest time, there was this assumption or kind of a one for all carte blanche expectation that whenever people encounter stress, the response, like social stress or any kind of acute stress, the response to that is fight or flight. I mean, you've all heard that many times. And that's been kind of the going model about or on people and like about people's response to stress since the 30s. And thing is, though, that was the assumption for both genders until it was kind of revealed that, well, a lot of the participants that these studies were done on in the 30s by specifically Walter Cannon, who kind of coined this fight or flight and deemed it a universal psychological response, he did most of his studies on men. So from then, in actually 2000 specifically, in the year 2000, the year 2000, there was a book written about called the tending instinct. So a lot of research has come between 1930s and 2000 about the differences of male responses to stress and female responses. When they looked at women who were actually responding to stress, they found that a lot of other kind of responses or hormones get released, and it's not a fight or flight response, but a tend and befriend is what they call it. So they like tend to befriend an enemy, basically. And so what that means that physiologically, instead of releasing large amounts of norepinephrine, which is adrenaline, and cortisol, which is a stress hormone, into the bloodstream the way men have it, women actually secrete endorphins and oxytocin, which is a bonding hormone, and it's also linked to motivation to behave in a friendly manner to your like children or close partners or things like that. So basically, we have here these two patterns of behavior. We have the male behavior, because I mean, think about humans and human beings and how we've been, how we came to be here today in the civilization. And a lot of our survival instincts and just instincts in general were honed during times that human beings had to hunt for their own food. They had to, create little villages, and men and women had slightly different, well, largely different roles based on that kind of setup. And men, when confronted with stress, which back in the day used to be primarily an animal or a warring party, like a raiding party or having to hunt and encountering a dangerous animal. So they have a release of adrenaline and cortisol, which increases aggression, but also the adrenaline helps you, move faster and just kind of have a active response to what is happening. While the women were actually left back in like the villages to, weave baskets, tend for children, pick berries, whatever the female role was. And a lot of their sort of behavior had to do with maintaining social order amongst themselves. So it wouldn't really work in a cohesive community, or if you're trying to build a community at all, it wouldn't really work for the people who were left behind to be together all day. That they would be responding to stress or social anxiety through like fighting. That just wouldn't work. So instead, women have this more tend and befriend situation. And to kind of put that into more research or like scientific context, there are experiences with primates, of course, like what are they called, studies with primates, that it's kind of universal. For rhesus macaques, for instance, if you put two males together that have never met before in a small cage, they will fight and try to kill each other. But in contrast, if you put two females in a cage, they will reduce the tension and awkwardness of the whole thing by exchanging grooming behavior, which is kind of like, getting your hair braided, brushed, or getting a massage. That sort of grooming behavior that also releases more endorphins and oxytocin. So they kind of have this feedback loop going of befriending and like being calm. And there's also been a lot of interesting Australian studies that suggested that the difference between the men and women in their response to stress may boil down to a single gene. So there is the SRY gene that the men have on the Y chromosome, and previously was thought to be related to the development of male genitalia, but because it has to do with testosterone. But they also found that the SRY protein regulates secretion of a lot of different neurotransmitters known as catecholamines, which includes norepinephrine, or adrenaline, dopamine, and serotonin. And they play an important role in neural activity and cardiovascular function and movement. So this gene, the SRY gene, that specifically kind of gives you that fight or flight response, is actually present in men. And that gives them, as we see, not only norepinephrine, serotonin, and dopamine, which you will need to have an actively functioning brain, but also have that adrenaline going to physically speed you up. But it also has to do with, as we see, increasing blood pressure, motor activity. So it's very much tied into running, fighting, dealing with an aggressor or an animal situation. But women do not have an SRY gene. So their response to stress is regulated by a lot of other genes that have to do with hormones, oxytocin, endorphins. So instead of having that one single fight or flight gene that men have on the Y chromosome, since women don't have a Y chromosome, they don't have that gene. And other genes, multiple genes, are actually involved in regulating all of that kind of behavior when confronted with social stress or otherwise. And there are, people say that men and women have different levels of testosterone, and obviously there's also estrogen and progesterone, so you can't just focus on testosterone. But sometimes women have, men have testosterone, right? That's a thing, right? But women sometimes have actually really high testosterone levels as well, and that kind of gives rise to more atypically gendered women. So it has been found that some women have really high instances of testosterone. It doesn't necessarily make them violent or anything like that, but it does change the way they react to situations, and they may take a more proactive stance if they're being threatened. So testosterone does play a role a little bit in that whole fight or flight response to threat situation, but it's not nearly as much as this SRY gene. Now, since we have this little bit of a background, we can move on to the differences in stress between men and women. And so there is kind of a thing that women report being depressed, they report being stressed, while men don't really report any of that information all that much. So I'm going to ask you guys to weigh in on any kind of experiences you might have with stress or depression and revealing that to others or keeping it in, or whatever kind of way you have dealt with letting others know that you might have a need to talk about something, or that you need mental health help. Anyone, anytime, take it away.
Does anyone else want to go first, or shall I?
Looks like you nominated yourself.
Okay, great. Never volunteer. Well, that kind of makes the point, doesn't it? It is difficult to bring up this kind of stuff. I think for me, it was very difficult to go for help, because I was denying to myself that I had any sort of depression problem to start with, because initially the symptoms were very much like chronic fatigue. So I had all these blood tests and everything, and I refused to accept that it was depression for a very long time, just because I didn't want to deal with it. And then when it was, there were no other options for what it could be. Basically, it was very hard to talk to people or to get any help. I just basically went on the pills and kept it to myself for a long time. I know that's taken as a kind of stereotypically male behavior, but I look back on it and I see things in my past that led me to keep quiet about it. I mean, I was horrifically bullied in both primary school and secondary school, and to show any kind of weakness was to just kind of to invite being beaten on or harassed or just basically shat on from a great height. So I learned very young, really, to just kind of suppress any sign of weakness, any sign of emotion as much as possible, and that made it very, very hard to go for help. And when I did, I mean, you do feel better a bit, but I mean, I've been in therapy for about 2 years now, and it still feels weird and very unsettling just to open up to the therapist, even though we've got a very good working relationship and everything. Just exposing that side, exposing any kind of weakness or vulnerability to anybody, just feels really kind of violating and dangerous. I get very worked up on the days I've got therapy sessions, not wanting to go because it just makes me that uncomfortable. So.
Well, that actually brings up two interesting kind of offshoots from that. I'll go over the kind of the quicker one first, and then go back to a slightly bigger question. So actually, something that Kat linked me earlier today is there's a study, or a new study from Ontario-based researchers found that when you have a walk-in clinic as opposed to a appointment, traditional like therapy appointment scenario, men specifically were much more likely to come into this walk-in therapy clinic rather than having to do with keeping up, with appointments. Men traditionally do not really deal with that sort of therapy kind of thing very well. There's been obviously a marked difference in the attendance of women in psychology kind of settings and counselorships, but men don't necessarily do that. It's difficult, as you mentioned, for a variety of reasons, for men to actually live up to a weekly or monthly or whatever meeting situation. So the walk-in thing, that if you're feeling super stressed and you feel like you can't handle it, you can just walk in whenever and have it dealt with right then. They showed a massive increase in men who are coming in to get that sort of help. So they're basically reaching a new demographic of basically reaching men by being flexible in their approach and catering the different approaches of mental health to the different genders, because there are very big differences between how both genders deal with stress and depression. And I'll get back to that in a moment. But something else you were saying, so it seems like, because we do have the stigma in not necessarily America per se, but I mean pretty much in the Western world. There is a stigma against like saying that you're depressed or that you have a depression, and it used to be a lot worse before the age of the internet in the past 5 years or 10 especially, because a lot of prominent artists and like actors and people that would normally be seen as idols and looked up to have actually been coming out with their own kind of personal blogging like experiences of, hey, you guys, by the way, I'm really fucking depressed and we should have awareness of this thing because a lot of people have it and they don't talk about it. So that's actually given a rise to a bit of more of an acceptance of depression as an actual diagnosis, as an actual disorder, as like a real thing. You're not just sad and you need to pull yourself up by the bootstraps. But there's still kind of, I think, stigma towards men having depression, and it seems like you might have had a little bit of that yourself, James, in the denial kind of period, and I'm wondering if that's where it stemmed from, that it's kind of a sign of weakness, as you're saying, to for a man to be depressed. It's like, how can I be incurably sad? That's stupid, right? But at the same time, we also have what you were saying about being afraid to open up about your particularities and therefore invite criticism and possibly endanger yourself in terms of legal action, or who knows, like there's been a lot of really crazy stuff happening to people because somebody didn't like what they said. Of course, there's the privilege of counselor and client, but is that sort of kind of like the fear you were talking about, some incriminating information, or did it have to do more with just opening up and being vulnerable, and that just feeling too foreign based on you being male and having experiences with bullying?
It's mostly the bullying thing. I mean, you said a lot there. The drop-in clinics thing makes a lot of sense to me for a variety of reasons. I think maybe guys are just more likely to go for help at the point where they need it. and if you've got to wait for an appointment, that moment might pass, and then you feel uncomfortable again, or you feel like you've dealt with it when you haven't really. I also think men will tend to prioritize things like work and so on, and so it's less easy to meet appointments, which are very often daytime appointments. The celebrities coming out, that's definitely something that was a huge aid to me. I mean, Stephen Fry did a great series of programs about his manic depression, and as someone I've admired as an intellectual and a comedian and everything else, that was good for me to hear things coming out of his very very articulate mouth, describing the same kind of things I'd gone through. Stigma, yes, but for me the stigma was. It's such a stereotypical thing for someone who works in a creative industry, and I was a goth in my teens and 20s as well. So it's such a stereotypical thing. It just kind of felt hackneyed. Oh, the depressed artist, the depressed writer. Woe is me. It just felt so contrived, almost like it couldn't be real. I still have trouble.
A mechanism to that, though. There's something that I was going to start getting into is how the sexual dimorphism, the way that stress tends to drive male brains more towards the feminine spectrum in certain things. But I'm sorry, go ahead.
Oh, no, that's a good point. I'm not a very conventional sort of male stereotype in a lot of ways. I do intellectual, artsy stuff. I'm not very hands-on, not very practical. But one way I've always felt that I could be manly was to be very, very stoic, to just kind of take everything the world threw at me and so on. And so that was, of course, the approach I took with depression was, I'll just kind of ignore it and cope and deal with it and not make a fuss about it, and it'll go away. But it got to be too much. That approach no longer worked. But I was so wedded to that as a concept and as a male identity, that was very hard to get around. And the other thing was, this still worries me now, and even though I'm quite out and open about having depression, is I really don't like being patronized. I don't want to be treated any differently because I've got this problem, and that's something I worry about constantly. Is are people pussyfooting around or not being straight with me or something because they're worried,
Yeah, and I don't mean to interrupt here or anything, but I've actually it's something.
I'm done. Go ahead.
Oh well, it's something that I'm not particularly. I still have a hard time even talking about that I've ever had depression or anything like that. Where as I have, and so it's one of those things. Yeah, I completely understand. It's one of those. That's one of the biggest problems that you have is it's a matter of respect, because there are certain things that you just you if you have any sort of weakness at all whatsoever, then you're suddenly no longer a man, and so it's like there's this it's indescribable. That's there's no way to really relate to people how if you've got something some illness of any kind or anything like that, how you can't really talk about it. There's so many roadblocks in the way, and so yeah, I understand exactly what you're saying. You don't want somebody to be pussyfooting around, because once again, that's a matter of respect. It's like, no, that's one of your biggest problems in being able to admit some sort of difficulties, is that you still want to maintain a level of respect, and that's kind of part of why men will not really ask for help, because then somehow if you're not first or last, it's kind of that's the kind of way. That's not necessarily a thing that men hold themselves, but that's kind of what society holds you to. Where if you have the slightest weakness, if you're anything other than some mythical, godlike, impervious thing, then you're completely worthless. It's the way in which people tend to go from one end of the spectrum all the way to the other is it's just absurd, and it's I don't know. I think maybe it has something to do with our primate beginnings, where they try to categorize into a simple binary or something, but back on the idea of a binary, one of the things I mentioned earlier was there's a study here. I guess I could I don't know how to link it in the chat or whatever, but one of the things that happens is okay, so we're talking about sexually dimorphic things in the brain specifically. There's something called the medial preoptic area in the hypothalamus, which is also often referred to as a sexually dimorphic area. It's like one of the most obviously sexually dimorphic areas because it specifically has to do with sex behaviors. And some of the things that happen is under social defeat stress. That's basically, in other words, anybody who's been, bullied and things of that nature, there will actually be changes to that area of the brain and the way in which that area of the brain expresses. It actually can change mounting behaviors in mice, whether they either present. In other words, if you hit that area with different chemicals, you can make a male mouse present to be mounted, or a female mouse mount. And so there's interesting interactions here between, excuse me, social defeat stress and alterations of the medial preoptic area, and it's something that I'm hoping that we'll kind of do a follow up on when I've had more time to really kind of digest some of the different studies and collect something. But I think we're trying to be a little more on the sociology aspect of it today.
A little bit, yes. Going back to kind of the stress part of the whole stress and depression conversation, because stress is kind of a small, minute depressive episode. It kind of results in like acute perhaps depression, like a day or a week or whatever. And then there's of course chronic depression, which is something that results from perhaps stress, as for instance in James' case and in many other cases. And there is, speaking of stress, there is indeed gender dimorphism. One of the other areas that responds differently based on being in a male or a female brain is actually the amygdala, which is a little almond-sized structure that is buried in the brain. It's sort of like behind the ears-ish area, and it has to do with fear and social learning. And in fact, children who have been abused or people undergoing really traumatic kind of situations, they end up having a lot of particular receptor on that amygdala. And the responses of amygdala activation vary between men and women. So that would be something else to add to our follow-up on the, for people who want to get more technical. I mean, this is CherrySTEM, STEM meaning science, technology, engineering, and mathematics. Probably not going to have that much mathematics, but maybe we'll have a physics talk one day. I don't know. But I'm kind of, still testing the ground. This is our second show, and I'm not exactly sure of our readership's level of knowledge and or interest in extremely technical details. It's a passion of ours personally, but it's not necessarily something that people will be super responsive to. So this is kind of like a testing the waters episode, and I would love to get into more details about the specific brain structures that are different between men and women. So for you STEM lords out there who want to hear that sort of stuff, leave comments after this hangout's over in like a little YouTube video comment, and let us know if you want us to do a more in-depth kind of episode, or if you'd really prefer we keep it slightly more like in layman's terms or understandable for the more casual peruser of science. But going back to slightly more casual science, speaking of stress and male and female reporting of it, as we mentioned, men don't necessarily report being stressed or especially being depressed, and women are more likely, of course, than men to report having a great deal of stress. Almost half of the women in a lot of the studies that were done said that their stress increased over the past 5 years, and I'm pretty sure the study that looked over all the stuff was done in 2010. So I guess since 2005, the stress level has risen greatly for women. Almost half of all women surveyed said their stress increased over the past 5 years compared to just 39% of men. So both men and women apparently noticed some stressors happening in the past 5 years or 10 years. Now, women are more likely to report that money and the economic kind of status, the economy, are their sources of their stress, while men are more likely to cite that work is a cause of their stress. And I think a lot of that goes back to what you guys were talking about and what Richard was saying specifically about respect. There is this kind of element of being treated respectfully and not being basically stressed by an alpha male subduing all the males around him into, omega status, which is actually they've noticed in animal studies that the stress level and the cortisol level, which is a stress hormone, in subordinate males is their testosterone is like gone. They have no testosterone. The kind of bullying or the lack of respect that is given in these really badly formed hierarchies that we frequently see in workplaces is actually something that gives men a great deal of stress. So that's actually an interesting clue as to how we can improve perhaps male experience and just kind of give them the courtesy of respect. Like we have these jokes that, oh, men just have a big ego, you gotta, flatter their ego, that's how you're gonna get whatever you want, just cater to his ego, laugh at his jokes. Well, first of all, what's wrong with being, nice to people? Of course, obviously, in this situation, it's about conning someone and kind of deceiving them that you're actually with them when you're not. But in theory, this kind of idea of giving men respect, just out of courtesy, for no, even if they didn't necessarily quote unquote deserve it, but having this modicum of civility and treating a human being like he's not garbage, which we usually see a lot of with men, especially recently with the manspreading and the other, you wore the wrong shirt, you did this wrong, you did that wrong. Men are walking on eggshells, not just at work, not just around their bosses, not just around their wives, if that's one of those situations, but they're basically walking on eggshells in public, in buses, public transportation, everywhere there is a stress level that has been increased for men in general. And I think just a little bit of respect, a little bit is going to go a long way. And that's actually, in my opinion, one of the new things that is coming out is that men have feelings too. Men have emotions, and they can get hurt. And just because the guy doesn't instantly burst out into tears or have some sort of emotional reaction to it or tells you about it, doesn't mean he's not experiencing it. A lot of times he will either be in denial or he will not be aware of what is bothering him. But stress has very definite effects on the brain, and it leads to depression. Now, I kind of would like to talk about a little bit of the female sort of side of things, where we have really a lot of attention given to women who are suffering, women who have depression, women who might, well, maybe not specifically depression, but it's a lot more acceptable, I feel like. I mean, I could be wrong, correct me if you think I am, but it does seem more acceptable in our society to have a approach towards women that's a little more lenient, that has a little bit of gives them a bit of a break when it comes to experiencing emotional hardship. Now, I'm not talking about women who are in power positions where, they have to maintain the same kind of no weaknesses approach that a lot of men have to do all the time. There are some women in certain positions at work where, they can't really tell people that they have depression because they will be seen as more weak and lose some of their earned positions. But overall, though, when it comes to just your everyday on the street, your mother, your sister, anyone, it feels like there's a lot of compassion for women when it comes to suffering or just even having a bad day or not feeling too good about yourself, with whole body positivity, just a lot of sort of effort. And traditionally, basically, women pay salaries of a lot of counselors and psychologists. So there is a industry of promoting and kind of maintaining a female client base, and also promoting women feeling these ways and coming back to therapy and all that. So I might say that there is an over medication or an over too much attention being given to women's issues to the point where it becomes detrimental, to the point where you're trying to find any little tiny thing that somebody might possibly be upset about and just kind of harping on it and ruminating on it. That's one of the things that is found, the difference between the way men and women deal with stress is that men externalize, meaning that they're a lot more likely to be aggressive and angry, burst out in anger or punch things, so be violent type of kind of externalization. So you take your feelings on the inside and you kind of put them on the outside in a certain of manner of trying to get something from the outside world to make you feel better. And they also go to drugs, alcohol specifically. So kind of aggression and alcohol are the two ways in which men deal with or externalize their stress and depression. Being aggressive, impulsive, things like that. Research has shown that. While women tend to internalize a lot of their issues, and it kind of becomes an echo chamber, and they ruminate on issues, and they have a lot of emotions about them. They develop other disorders sometimes, like eating disorders, panic disorder, anxiety disorder. Women report having those a lot more, who also have depression, while men tend to just be more antisocial and, have alcohol dependence, and those are just kind of their ways of dealing with it.
So basically you're saying they're going to extremes in both cases, whereas where, perhaps men could use a little more softness, perhaps sometimes women could use a little more of the hey, you can do it kind of thing. And so because men are always, it's like you gotta go out, you gotta toughen up, you gotta cowboy up, you gotta, and there's no and there's no softness saying, yeah, hey, it's okay, you need to chill out, and deal with this. Whereas with women, perhaps it's exactly the opposite. But one of the things I think that you brought up earlier that I was going to say is that it's kind of like the difference between if a child has a weakness, it's not seen as a like if a child cries, for instance, it's not their job to be strong. And so it's the same thing, I think, with why it's okay for women to show that kind of softness or weakness, is because it's seen, it's like it's not their job, and so it's completely okay. It's not really seen as a fault at all. Whereas with men, it's their job to be strong, and so therefore this is a failure of the very essence of their character if they're not this strong thing. But I think both James and Kat wanted to speak.
I was just going to say, yeah, that makes sense to me. I mean, there might be the temptation in men to externalize our suffering, but a lot of the other things that you mentioned, Anna, like the alcoholism and so on, these are ways to keep a lid on that and to turn that into something more internal, to shy away from public interactions because you don't want to blow up, you don't want to bother anyone, you don't want to hurt anyone. And I think that kind of pushing it down is maybe a factor that leads to this higher male suicide rate, because that's kind of the ultimate internalization of harm, just destroying yourself.
Well, that is the curious thing, that a lot more women report being depressed, and yet more men commit suicide. So I think that really goes back to the rumination and kind of echo chambering, I don't know if that's the right word, but having a feedback loop, a downward spiral of a negative feedback loop of depression and anxiety and, the panic, eating disorders, etc., and specific phobias too. Women develop specific phobias as a result of their depression, while men actually go out and do something about it, whether it be punch something or drink or just kill yourself. That's one of those things that men seem to, it just fits with the externalization or internalization situation. Now, I was kind of going into something there earlier where we were mentioning there's kind of a cottage industry built around treating female illnesses. And I feel like that it may be dangerous at this point, where we are kind of trying to find an issue that may not be there, or we're trying to cure someone of 10 different things that we think they have because they're a woman, and it's like, well, women are susceptible to this stuff, and women report. I would say that women are more in touch with their feelings, in the sense of they can put words to their feelings, or kind of like find specific things that make them sad about, they are sad about, and they just kind of can come up with a laundry list of things that don't really sit all that well with them. And I mean, that ultimately, basically, I would like to just interject real quick. I'm going to interrupt myself here and mention that men have this kind of approach of one or nothing. This is like, I mean, in terms of, okay, I'm speaking metaphorically, but also more generally, and this is in terms of general behaviors of men and women in satisfaction, in terms of picking something out at a store, choosing a color for something, making a decision on anything, there is a level of satisfaction that men reach. They look like, let's say they have 10 things in front of them, and they have to pick the best one. 10 apples, like, I guess apples is a bad choice, but basically it would be like bison or mammoth or like whatever the fuck man hunted that would be in herds. And so men would come upon this and be like, we have to find the one that suits our needs best. Look for the baby, look for the lame one, look for the closest one. Found it, that one, go. So they have this one track sort of pick the thing, stick with the thing, love the thing, it's great attitude that is was part of survival. While women had the role of picking berries, doing more like gathering, while men did the hunting, the women did the gathering. And color of fruit and berries is a really important indicator of their ripeness, of their potential lethality. I don't know if that's even a word, I just made it up. But you kind of had to have these built-in layers of dissatisfaction, so to speak, that would provide a better survival mechanism when it came to the women's role. So I think that kind of leads into our modern day, because we still have all these instincts, we still have all these ways of dealing with the world, but we have a new civilization, city setting around us. So I think what happens is men might pick one thing that they say, oh, I'm just, I don't know, stressed today, or it's just this thing at work, or it's just this other thing, instead of like looking deeper and looking more into what it is that is happening with them. They're just kind of, that's not what men do. They don't sit and think about their feelings. They have to go out and do stuff. And they have to pick that one thing and go with it. While women have this kind of layers of way, they could look back into their past and into their life, and they could pick a lot of things that weren't exactly right, that weren't exactly perfect, that were just a few shades off from the ideal feeling or the ideal experience. And so because of that, there can be a lot, and I'm not saying they're lying or they're, you know, exaggerating or whatever. These are just the way female brains think. And they see all these layers of stuff that is like, oh no, I have all these reasons. And so they will talk about and report, you know, 10, 20 different things that are wrong with them because of this process of going and looking over stuff and basically being slightly dissatisfied based on like the ideal experience that they would have. And so because of not really understanding that that is part of the way female brains work, and that a balance to a hyper-feminized brain is to actually have an element in your head that says, okay, now let's pick some things and stick with them, and let's pick a level of satisfaction and stick with that, and let's throw away things that are just not really, they don't really matter, and focus on the things that are actually contributing to my issue. And because we don't really know how to do that yet for women, and women themselves don't necessarily, you know, people they're not born neuroscientists, they don't know this stuff. So I think because women have a tendency to report a lot of things that, you know, they can search out in themselves, because of that, there is a prevalence of treating women for 10,000 different things that they may not even have based on one word that they said, and the therapist was like, oh, great, let me give you more drugs. So that actually brings us to Kat's experience, and if you'd like to take us away with that, that would be great.
Yeah, so I have two sort of thoughts that I want to go over. The first being that I have never felt stigmatized or uncomfortable for talking about my mental illness experience. Granted, I don't want to share my vulnerabilities with people when I'm currently having an episode or a panic attack or anything like that. I don't want anyone to see me or view me as weak. But in terms of saying, hey, guess what? I have this problem, I've never had an issue with that outside of my own parents, who my stepfather just didn't believe me, and my mother has a traditionally masculine way of processing emotions, and so she wasn't able to understand mine. Outside of that, I've been met overwhelmingly with compassion and just general positivity and understanding, and so I'm very grateful for that. It was very easy for me in the past to have my mother call my boss and say, hey, my daughter's having a panic attack and won't be at work today, and I could go back to work and nobody would look at me different. So there's that. That goes with what both of you were sharing about your experiences and how you did not have that privilege. The second thing is that I have been overwhelmingly diagnosed with tons and tons and tons of different things and I feel like that's extremely unhealthy. I've been diagnosed with PTSD, OCD, agoraphobia, acute anxiety disorder, bipolar disorder. At one point I was told I had depression, which being treated for that was terrible and super inaccurate. And just having all of these labels thrown at my face, it A, did not help my problem, did not help me understand my problem, and B, it made me feel like I was more and more of a broken human being. And it was unhealthy and dehumanizing and demeaning and not helpful at all.
And that's that cottage industry that she was talking about, where basically it becomes kind of a feedback loop where they tell you you're broken, and so you become more broken instead of telling you, hey, yeah, there's a couple little things, but yeah, you're gonna be fine. There's something to that I've like kind of experienced. I think that's kind of a male way of dealing with. That's how we deal with our own problems. It's like, yeah, there's a couple of problems, but it's gonna be fine. Even if it's like a bullet wound, it's fine. And sometimes that gets you, even if it's not really accurate, it's not really true. That positivity about that it's gonna work out tends to be kind of self-fulfilling, and so perhaps that's something that Cherry was trying to get at, that where they start to tell you all these things that are wrong with you, and they think that that's helping, whereas it may actually be hurting.
Right. There have been numerous studies that show that the more you place a label on someone, the more that person conforms to that label.
They did. I was just reading up on some of that for not just specifically labels, and I absolutely agree with that. Nothing is more limiting than self-limiting beliefs or beliefs that others or hold that limit you in terms of you can only be this, you can only be that. So that is definitely rings true from my personal experience. But there's also in the recent Scientific American Mind article, they had a little blurb about people putting on suits, for instance, versus regular clothes, and they had a greater response from others trying to negotiate with them when they wore a suit, and their testosterone levels, for instance, were really low when men dressed down into sweats. So what you wear and how you perceive yourself so also matters along with those labels. And the same was for a doctor's coat. People who wore a doctor's coat versus people who were told it's a painter's coat, or people who just looked at a coat hanging on the wall they were told it's a doctor's coat. The ones who were actually wearing it had great improvements on their decision making and kind of attention, focus, basically a lot of cognitive metrics that they used. People actually performed better when they were wearing a doctor's coat, perhaps 50% better behavior when they felt like they were a doctor in a doctor's coat. Now, they didn't even feel like they were a doctor, they were just wearing a doctor's coat, and I guess wearing that label, wearing that social sign to others that says, I am a doctor, improved their own understandings about themselves. And we also saw this with girls who were told that they can't do good at math, because that's one of the traditional things. It was like, oh, girls are bad at math, guys are bad at whatever. And a lot of those dynamics have been switching and changing, and there are gender atypical girls that nobody cared about. And when we're telling girls now, it's like, hey, you can do math, like you'll be fine at it. They actually do improve just from the belief of themselves or other people around them that they can do it. And yes, there's definitely a cottage industry in a way. That's exactly what I was trying to describe. And as some people pointed out in chat, that there is a kind of what's called beauty salon for women, cognitive beauty salon. That's what therapy is. It's kind of a cognitive beauty parlor where you come in and you choose which makeup you want, what hairstyle you want, what nails, and they kind of come in and pick and choose from the different disorders they might possibly have, or what the doctors read into them having, since a lot of the therapy is mediated by psychiatry that deals with, they're basically licensed drug dealers. They give people drugs. There's been more deaths from prescription drugs in America than I think from most hard drugs at this point. So it's kind of a literal industry as well as a niche market, and that caters to women in that sense. But to kind of go back to the differences between men and women in terms of stress and their reactions in depression and things like that, a lot of, I mean, there's a lot that is not understood or that is not put into practice, since therapy places are notoriously, catered towards women, to the point where Tom Golden, one of our, friend of the show, he is a male only counselor and a therapist, and those are he's like the only one practically in the United States. There is a market lack of representation for male only therapists, and I feel like segregation is never a good thing, but I think in some things segregation between the genders specifically is important when we're talking about very few specific things, such as well, therapy, for instance, because men and women have utterly different ways of processing and grieving and dealing with anger and dealing with sadness. They have vastly different ways of approaching that. So I would be in favor of advocating male only and female only therapists instead of having kind of a mix and just a mixed bag for everyone. It's kind of, when you're jack of all trades, you're a master of none. So I don't think it fits men or women all that well because of this new kind of monster that we've created. And based on that, or going back to like my original point, we noticed that men, when they're stressed out, and a lot of people jump to conclusions that it's like, oh, testosterone's bad, toxic masculinity, all this stuff is terrible. And a lot of that is basically a lot of our instincts and brain activations that are still left over from just the way human beings happen to be. And men and women, because of the fight and flight or tend and befriend, they legitimately have different coping strategies and different approaches to things. And so we should not unfairly label men as being X or Y when a lot of it they just has to do with their biology. So for instance, stressed out people in a study, you had stressed out people that were men and women, and they gave them, a basic ice water dunking, increase their cortisol levels, just a very simple acute stress situation. And they did brain functioning imaging and things like that. And so when they were shown angry or neutral faces, so these stressed out people, when they were shown angry or neutral faces, men specifically had a decrease of activity in the fusiform facial area, which helps with facial recognition. And by contrast, frazzled or stressed women seemed to be more attuned. So they had greater activation in the fusiform facial area. So they were more attuned to recognizing facial expressions. So for instance, that's such a simple little thing, but it really goes back to tend and befriend or fight or flight situation. When you're dealing with acute stress, which our bodies, we have adrenaline, we have cortisol, we have all the hormones and catecholamines, dumping themselves into our body because it's kind of a primal response. We're still human animals. We're still, you can't really, just because we have civilization and culture and, think of God and where do we come from and all this magical, mystical stuff, we're still kind of this soul being, whatever, riding an animal. We have these instincts that we can't help. They overwhelm the rational mind frequently. So we have men that dealing with stress, acute stress, basically confrontation or, a fight or whatever it was that they had to deal with back in the day, meaning, prehistoric times, they don't have the luxury of looking at the person's face that they're battling with and to try to figure out what they're feeling, how they're thinking. They really can't they can't afford the luxury of dealing with another person's emotions and that possibly throwing them off when they're in a life or death situation. While women, since they have a tend and befriend approach, they are more attuned to facial expressions so that they can better manipulate, that they can better cater to whatever the emotion or feeling of their adversary is. And that not only works with between female to female relations, but I think one of the big reasons for tend and befriend behavior, or at least from what we historically were told about, like raiding parties, and even before the Vikings, there were, villages would raid each other, kill all the men, and then probably kill the children too, but also rape and take the women for their own. So I think a lot of that tend and befriend actually has to do with dealing with some of those situations too, where you're basically having to face everybody you know dying, everything is terrible, somebody's taking you away, you don't know where, and you're going to have to live in that new area with that new person, with that, your captor or whatever. And so it wouldn't really be useful or even survivable to have an attitude when you are taken as a captive. It makes a lot more sense for the body to induce endorphins and oxytocin and to have a bonding moment with your new person that you're with now. In fact, that's one of the things that is kind of a cheat, a life hack. When you go on dates, when you go on your first date, you might want to take a girl to a scary movie or a amusement park, because that little bit of adrenaline that we discussed actually increases oxytocin and endorphins. So not only are they going to have a greater time, but you're also going to have a better bonded sort of situation later on if you engage in, kind of activities together that release endorphins. Now, going from stress to depression, unless you guys want to interject something in there anywhere, anything that I said, if it hits off something.
I was just going to say, I was on one of the shows with Tom, and he's a great guy with a lot of good insights. I was lucky enough to get a therapist who, while they're not male exclusive, they specialize in men. But that I had to go private for that. In my country, even though we've got socialized healthcare, getting any kind of mental health help at all in the UK is very difficult. Takes a very long time, and it's a kind of standardized set of help. All you can really get is cognitive behavior therapy, which has a few useful tools, but a lot of it is just basically talk therapy, which I think is less helpful for men. One of the things Tom was talking about echoed back to what you were saying earlier about men get a lot of benefit from being shown respect more than necessarily from being shown sympathy. I think that's true, and I think we definitely do need to have at least multiple approaches to mental health, whether it's gendered or not, because there's always going to be outlying cases. We just need more ways of going about it than the ones that are available.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right. Now, I'm echoing.
Sorry.
Okay, thank you. They're going to basically, we're kind of leading into psychiatry and therapy using medications a little bit and things like that. As you did mention, I'm not sure what the other part of the cognitive behavior. I guess you mentioned respect, James, but I was just wondering what you think would be a good addition to just cognitive behavior therapy, because I do have this attitude as well. That's one of the reasons why I have a neuropsychology major or degree, whatever, is I went into college to study psychology, and my first 2 years, it was great. Psychology, cognitive, this and that, and then I got really interested in cognitive psych and took a lot of those classes, and then I realized neuroscience is a thing, and it's like a big thing that determines a lot of the ways in which psychology manifests itself. So I had to switch. I was like, you can't be a therapist, which is kind of my goal of why I went into college for that particular degree. And I felt like you couldn't be a therapist rightfully or help people in the right way without knowing neuroscience, without having an understanding of nutrition and how that affects the different brain areas, like what the brain needs. As my counselor, my college counselor and professor, one of her sign off on an email is the mind is what the brain does. And that's exactly what it is. The brain is the actual thing that is also affected by nutrition, by like different hormone imbalances, by a variety of things, that you can't just do cognitive behavior therapy. You have to also deal with potential structural damage or improper balances of chemicals and things like that. And that's where, unfortunately, psychiatry comes in. And I say unfortunately because psychiatry has a really bad track record, especially with antidepressants. And the effects of which we know we have so many bad side effects. But I mean, it's as simple as SSRIs, which are selective serotonin reuptake inhibitors and the most common antidepressant pills currently. The science community doesn't know how they work. They know it works for some people sometimes to make them less sad, but it also makes a lot of people kill themselves, and it has something to do with serotonin. And serotonin seems to be a problem in people who are depressed, so just give them SSRIs. I mean, let's see what happens. There really is no quantifiable method, at least last I checked, which was a few years ago, but there was really no specific mechanism that science knows for how SSRIs work. They just know they sometimes do. But as I mentioned, they also sometimes lead to suicides. And overall, in general, it's, in my opinion, not the right approach to treating anything. If you deal with just medicine or if you deal with just cognitive behavior therapy, you have to have a mix of approaches, and you have to understand the brain before you give it things. And
it's funny. It's just that it's very male versus female, kind of broad versus narrow perspective on how the drugs are. There is a known mechanism. It's just too finite. It's too tiny. They know exactly that it blocks the reuptake of that particular.
But how does that help?
But they don't know the broad scale, larger perspective mechanism, and so it's kind of funny because that's one of the things I was going to say that seems to be very different between the male and female brain types, and the sexual dimorphism has to do with if you want to be more adaptive and more broad, have more broad perspective, well then you might also end up with analysis paralysis, where you're looking at too many things at once. You're too broad. But when you're narrow and you're trying to focus on one thing, pick something, do something about it, well then you also become kind of one-track mind, doing that one specific thing, and you can't see the forest for the trees, and you focus on with these tiny things. But I have a whole larger theory of the spectrum between the extremely male versus the extremely female mind. But James was wanting to speak about some drug stories that he has.
Well, I can lead into that actually in a little bit. I am really curious to hear about the male and female, because we've mentioned this a few times in this kind of a general approach, or rather a way of viewing large groups of people, people in like all the people in general, people in specific fields, these differing groups different groups that seem to have a more male-leaning pattern of thinking or a more female-leaning pattern of thinking. We're not even talking about just specific individuals that may be gender atypical and things like that, but we're talking about a big, larger sort of a mimetic, like a meta level of stuff. I really want to hear what you have to say about that.
All right, well let's let James speak about his drug story real quick. Definitely, it's a long topic I can get into.
Okay, perfect. Let me segue then into. I wanted to say a brief thing about antidepressants and all that, and then we'll, I guess, get back to that. But there is actually differences in the way men and women metabolize antidepressants. So based on the individual, once again, we can't paint men and women when it comes to mental health with such a broad brush as to give them the same stuff. That's one of my problems with the education system too. We teach boys and girls in the same room in the same way, and boys and girls don't necessarily learn, or more masculine minded or more feminine minded, because they don't always match with what's between the legs. Those individuals, they can't necessarily learn in a way, like female brains process things differently than male brains. And it goes beyond just what's a boy or a girl on the outside. There were studies done with fMRIs that showed that gay women, their brains activated a lot more like men, and that gay men had their brain activate a lot more like women. So we are legitimately talking about female or male brains, regardless of what body they're in. And those bodies, though, I mean, a lot of times when you have a less testosterone male, for instance, or more testosterone female, there are also going to be muscle changes, body size changes. There's going to be minute difference, well, not minute maybe, but pretty major sometimes, or sometimes minute, but there are going to be differences in the way the body metabolizes things, in the way it's shaped, how big it is, how much muscle versus fatty tissue there is. And a lot of that actually relates back to testosterone and things like that. So when we look at antidepressants and we give everybody just a fuck ton of SSRIs or barbiturates or whatever they're using nowadays, or were using, here, take all this stuff, except men metabolize things differently than women, so their drug absorption rates are actually different. And I don't think any of that is looked at anywhere, because there is an approach to discussing any kind of gender dimorphism or difference between the sexes. That has been such a taboo subject for the longest time. Thank God for neuroscience in the past 10, 15 years, with neuroscience really becoming a big thing. With there's neuroscience departments being created in colleges. There's a lot more sophisticated research that can be done because of our technology, and that actually finally broke that dam of being able to talk about the differences between men and women, and not just in their behavior, but specifically in their brains. And there's always kind of an association with that, that there's something wrong with saying that there are differences between people. It just because things are different doesn't mean that they're less. That's if I can impart one thing on people, this would be it, that everybody has advantages and disadvantages. Absolutely everybody. And you can, male brains have disadvantages and advantages, and female brains have disadvantages and advantages, and they work best in harmony. Or when you have a brain, which most of us do, you would want to have it balanced a little more towards the middle, not be hyperfeminine or hypermasculine, because both of those can lead to toxicity on both of those
and it comes down to, like, there's a, whenever you have a specialization, you tend to lose generalization, and so there is a, you can't have everything all at once. You can't have up and down simultaneously. So when you specialize, you automatically have weaknesses, and if you're completely general, then you also have the weakness of not having a specialty. So there's just, it's this understanding that there is always a trade-off, that there is always, so anytime that somebody has some strength, it also means that they have some weakness. But a lot of times it's the other way around as well. It's like, but sometimes people will focus on the strength and not see the weakness, or they'll focus on the weakness and not see the strengths. Like even depression itself shows that there's some reason why we become depressed after we have traumatic events, and it has to do with being able to adapt to circumstances better. We have to be able to look at our circumstances from a broad perspective. We're not necessarily picking one thing out. And so I think specifically with men, that having basically a mind that is looking at a lot more different little things at once, and is less, one track, allows a kind of adaptive, reintegration of all the information around you, and say, okay, the village is burned down, all my allies are dead. What do I do now? I got to look at all the circumstances and figure it out from here. I think it is, the depression itself is an adaptation. It doesn't just, I don't think it's just a complete failure of the system, because it is something that is, that there's pretty good evidence to suggest that it's adaptive. But anyway, James still hasn't had an opportunity to tell his drug stories.
I was just about to get to that, but you just said brain depression stuff, and isn't there myelin? Isn't there myelin that a myelin release with?
Well, yeah. Well, okay. So there's things like changes to prolactin levels. There's so many different things that I'd have to brush up. I'm hoping we'll do a more technical show maybe next week or a week after, and we'll actually get into some of the technicals, and I'll brush back up on the specifics. But yeah, I mean, there's changes to myelin levels. There's changes, all these cascading events that are adaptive.
Yeah, so as we were talking about the antidepressants and the basically different ways men and women may metabolize them, and also the suicide risk that associated with, and all the other side effects, and the variety of drugs that there are on the market currently to treat depression, and doctors are just randomly picking at one and go, here, try this one, see if it works. What is your experience with that, James?
Okay, I think my mic was switched off, but hopefully you can hear me now.
Yes.
Just briefly, you were talking about adaptations. One theory I'd heard thrown around was that depression allows for really intense introspection and concentration, and so that may have been a positive adaptive quality of it. But anyway, yeah, drugs. I've been on at least 7 different antidepressants. I should preface this by saying that don't be put off using antidepressant drugs, because they can be helpful, they can stabilize you, and so on. I've just had unusually bad experiences.
I don't think you're alone in that, but I will say, as much as I will advocate natural things and cognitive behavior therapy and nutrition and things with neuroscience, if you feel like you're gonna kill yourself or kill somebody else, and you really, 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 really feel like you're gonna do it, go fucking take some antidepressants. Go see it. That is one time, place. I would absolutely advocate the use of psychiatric drugs if you're in that bad of a place.
Yeah,
But I don't think your stories are different.
a big problem, I think, is the way that they're used. In that there's often either you can't afford a therapist, a proper therapist, or there aren't any available, and so they just put you on drugs to allow you to cope without actually addressing any of the problems that are making you depressed or giving you the tools to cope without the drugs. So I think they're used as a panacea when they shouldn't. But going through the list of side effects on these things, I have tended to have the much rarer and stranger side effects than are normally listed. So there's common things like, the first few weeks after you take one, your mood may worsen and so on. That's something you have to look out for. So you need a lot more support during the first few weeks when you're on a drug. And yeah, I had that. But other things, one of them gave me screaming night terrors, which was a lot of fun for everybody. Another one gave me horrible night sweats. So I would wake up in the morning and the bed would be drenched with sweat. I would be drenched with sweat, and it was just weird. Other ones gave me not night terrors, but really intense, weird, bizarre dreams. The other ones made me so tired. I was only really properly awake for maybe 4 to 6 hours a day, and so on. One effect that they don't necessarily trumpet, but which is quite common with a lot of antidepressants, is a particular concern for people who work in creative industries. So if you're an artist or a writer or a journalist or someone, you need to be really careful about balancing your dosages, because it has this effect. It kind of suppresses your creativity. My doctor had another patient with depression who was a sculptor, and the sculptor had gifted him several of his works, and the doctor uses them as a demonstration of this, because he's kind of switched onto it. And you can see a marked difference between the sculptures before he was diagnosed with depression and put on the drugs, and after. Like, the early ones are much more creative and fluid, and it's it's hard to describe. It'd be easier if I could show you, but I can't. And the ones afterwards are much more geometric and mathematical, and there's this marked difference between the two. So if you work in a creative industry, you have to be even more careful than people normally are about monitoring your dosage and finding the right balance that allows you to still function and to work. So the other problem I had was I seem to adapt to these drugs very, very quickly compared to normal people. That's part of the reason I plowed through so many different drugs. They had to keep upping the dose, and quite rapidly I was on the maximum dose, and I had such a tolerance for it that they had to switch me to another drug, even if I was on a drug that was working well for me, because it rapidly tapered off. But I really want to stress that if you're at that point, a drug is like a plaster cast around your leg while it heals, but you need to do other things to make yourself better. You can't just go on the drug. Even if that's all they have available, you need to find something else, like a mutual support group or something to actually address the problems, because the drugs can't last forever.
On that note, did you have any experiences, or maybe your critters having experiences with any kind of psychoactive substances or prescribed substances in your experience, Kat?
Me and my critters have experience with this. So I, at one point, was I was sent to the psych ward for a week, where the psychiatrist there, he talked to me for about 30 seconds, noticed that, hey, look, you cut your arm, you must be depressed, and put me on Zoloft. Didn't bother to check my other medical histories. Didn't bother to ask me any sort of questions at all about why I was there. And me being on Zoloft is absolutely the worst experience of my life. I already have a problem with dissociating at times, And the Zoloft made that a million times worse because it just kind of put me in this weird sort of daze, made it really easy for me to disconnect from reality. And I wasn't even a person on Zoloft. Meanwhile, my roommate is on Zoloft and she's just thriving on it. She's doing absolutely wonderful. So, drugs, they can have a very positive effect, but I think that when they're just prescribed all willy-nilly like that, it can be incredibly unhealthy. My cat, now, he was almost euthanized when he was a kitten because they did not think he would ever be adoptable because he had really bad anxiety issues. And I mean, it made him extremely destructive. He would pee on everything. We'd saran wrapped our couches. He scratched up everything, and then you wouldn't even see him. He did all of this, when the house was quiet and everyone was asleep. Eventually, I convinced my vet to try Prozac, and he thrived on that. He did very, very well. He's still him. It didn't change his personality. He's still not going to run up to strangers and be like, I love you, let's be friends. But his peeing stopped completely, his scratching stopped completely, and I was able to then use rehabilitation techniques and training to then help him get over his greater anxieties. And so basically I took a drug and I combined it with therapy in order to make him a healthier cat. He is no longer on Prozac at this point, and you can become friends with him. And that was after many years of solid work.
Well, speaking of pussy, we should we should segue into sex drive and antidepressants. That was kind of part of the reason for the title, Sex and Depression. There are some marked differences, particularly in men. Well, in women too, because testosterone really is one of the greater markers of sexual prowess. Not prowess, that's the wrong word. Of sexual libido, having a strong sexual healthy drive. It's generally more pronounced in people that have higher testosterone levels, and people have lower testosterone levels, they're basically close to being asexual. And specifically, we would mention briefly that stress lowers testosterone in men, and also, antidepressants do some really weird stuff to your sex drive and your whole sexual experience. So, James, take it away.
Yeah, that's another thing people really have to keep in mind, especially if they're in relationships, and obviously sometimes relationships can be sources of stress for people. More commonly, at least according to the list of side effects, most antidepressants will cause a fairly severe drop in libido. In rare cases, it will have the opposite effect. But neither of these circumstances, and I've had both on different drugs, are particularly helpful. You might think it's a good thing to be perpetually randy, but it really isn't. It's incredibly frustrating. It's a huge stressor. I mean, you see stories about animals in the zoo, like male lions who are cooped up and never get to mate with anything, and then they just pace up and down until their paws are bloody, and that's kind of the feeling you get when this thing is turbocharging you. And the other end of the scale, you just kind of feel dead and disinterested, and you might find yourself kind of obsessing over that fact and wondering what's wrong with you. So yeah, these are all factors you have to keep in mind when you decide whether the drug route is a good one, and whether it's worth it. I think that's the big decision. You have to decide, are all these potential side effects and problems, and you should try and find out what issues you do get with a particular drug. But where's the balance? Do I need to function as a full human being, albeit with depression, or do I need to take down the depression? I know these other issues copable with, but yeah, it's definitely interesting the effect these drugs can have on you.
Well, that brings up a really interesting point, and I'm reading some of the live chat for the show, and a lot of people are sounding off. A lot of men are sounding off too on having basically difficulty maintaining erections, or even getting any difficulty or lack of ability to come once you do have that, or to ejaculate, and a variety of other issues that are associated with antidepressant use. So the interesting thing to me, though, is what you said about sexual performance exacerbating potential depression or anxiety. As we know, a lot of these sort of depressive things, they do come from a lot of little things, a lot of stressors, and when you focus on it and ruminate on it, whether you have a male or a female brain, it still creates the same kind of feedback loop when you're aware of these problems and you're thinking about them and you're worried about them and your cortisol levels rising, you have anxiety about the whole thing. So interestingly, though, I would like to point something out that I don't know if many people are aware of or think about it that way, but we hear a lot of criticism. Porn gets a lot of flack for, or at least in the mainstream media, for giving women an unrealistic expectation about their bodies. Which to me, I mean, I would give the same answer to that that I give to anti-sex bigots who have issues with porn and claim that basically all porn is, women getting their faces stomped on, which those women chose to do, by the way. But whatever. But they will claim that women porn is just women getting their faces stomped on and covered in feces and being beaten and raped, and that's porn, and so it's terrible for women. And my answer to those people, as well as people who say that there are unrealistic body expectations for women given by porn, I will say, what porn are you watching? Where the fuck are you getting this stuff? One of the most popular international stars before she went off to do her other things was Sasha Grey. She was petite brunette. She was girl next door. Stoya is one of the others that made it pretty big before doing her own thing lately, and she had small breasts, dark hair, petite body. Porn is no more Jenna Jameson, all blonde with giant, like peroxide blonde with triple D's that are obviously fake. That's an overly tan. That 80s sort of model of what porn stars are is no longer relevant in the fucking slightest. So the thing, though, about porn and unrealistic body expectations and unrealistic sexuality expectations. So I will say that, I mean, porn is fantasy. It does present different people with different ways of having sex, and occasionally it'll center on a particular way of having sex, like the jackhammer thing, or like the finger blasting thing, and everyone's like, oh my god, we have to do that, that's a thing to do. And it's like, no, there's other porns, you need to look at it, so don't just. And it is fantasy. It is a particular. It's Hollywood for naked people. So I mean, there are trends, there are dumb things involved with it, but ubiquitously we have in 99% of cases of male porn stars, they have to be extremely well built, which takes a tremendous amount of time, energy, patience, money, whatever, to spend that much time and money at the gym, or spend that much time at the gym, and I guess gyms are expensive too, so you spend money. So in protein powders and all that, it takes a lot to keep yourself in shape as a male performer, because a lot of times male performers in porn is a stunt cock with a torso attached. Like, you don't necessarily, I mean, you see faces here and there, but a lot of the shots are focused on eliminating as much of the dude, especially face, as possible. However, there's also the big dicks with constant, instant erection, and people don't realize that it takes hours, sometimes 8 to 12 hours on a porn set to shoot, an hour's worth of content that will end up being an hour's worth of content. And you have to be, you have to go off set and you have to go back on set. Things are edited. A lot of times when you have like facials and things like that, or cream pies, there's not even real cum. So I mean, it's really at this point, mainstream porn to me anyway, is the Hollywood of naked people. There's a lot of behind the scenes stuff that give you an illusion that isn't necessarily real, but there is that common constant element of men being ready instantly, of them having large penises and cut, large, circumcised, large, instantly erect penises and perfect abs, and that is a ubiquitous thing that you can't necessarily find a ubiquitous thing like that about women in porn. So based on that, it does, especially a lot of people watching porn nowadays, it gives, I think, very unrealistic expectations of male performance. And frequently also, I've noticed, and I mean, I could be off base here, let me know, But from what I've seen, there is a really strong pressure. Oh, real quickly, men in porn also have to take Viagra like all the time. There's a performer, Danny Wilde, who I don't know if he goes by that anymore, but he had to quit porn because he was told that, dude, look, if you take any more Viagra, you're not going to be able to have an erection ever again. It's just one of those things, taking 2 or so to shoot, to be ready. It's kind of a ubiquitous thing, and he obviously abused it and had a few priapisms that they have to medically reduce, the erection that wouldn't go away. And doctors were like, look, dude, you're going to build up so much scar tissue doing all this that you're not going to actually be able to have an erection, but quit with that. So a lot of that, what we see in porn, guys not needing to have any warm-up, them being ready to fuck a girl just because she's there and half naked, like, that's not really realistic for how human being sexuality operates. Foreplay is markedly missing from a lot of porns, and not just for women. In fact, they've been big on like oral sex and kissing and things like that are for women are more warm-ups, but not so much on. You don't see a soft dick then gets hard during a porno. That's just not something you see. So back to my like other point, it seems that there is emphasis on the men needing to sort of live up to that expectation, and that it's their fault and something wrong with the man and his junk that makes him unable to instantly get an erection, that makes him unable to perform. And not only that's one of the male's greatest, fears, weaknesses in general, anything to do with the penis is like, oh God, no, that's my lifeblood, man. Those are my babies. You can't do that. So there's already a lot of stress that has to do with male, genitalia in that sense, but especially performance. I mean, talk about your worth as a sexually virile man is being put into question. And in my experience, it's women, unless they want to pull this like, oh, you're not attracted to me anymore, drama line. For the most part, it's, once again, even that line is still blaming the man, is still saying that the man is doing something wrong, that he is not being attracted enough, that he is not performing, instead of the woman taking any responsibility for actually pleasing the man. So it seems that not only are we talking about depression or antidepressants, and depression itself, lowering testosterone levels to the point of antidepressants making it practically impossible or difficult to achieve an erection or perform to your standard. And on top of that, you have anxiety about all that. And then on top of that, you also have whoever you're in a relationship with not being understanding of that. So is that something that you've experienced, or can you sound off on that, James?
It's definitely a source of stress. I don't know how much I can really talk about it. Because when you're talking about relationships, it's going beyond your own personal experience and involving other people, which I'm not so comfortable talking about necessarily. Sure. But it is definitely a stress. I mean, for me, most of the drugs caused the opposite problem, which was to feel hypersexual and with a massively heightened libido. I felt like I was 15 again or something. Random erections on buses because they're moving kind of nice. Stuff,
did you take
like
Wellbutrin by any chance?
Which one?
Wellbutrin. At least that's the the American name.
I don't know what it goes by here.
Yeah. Let me see if I can find the actual name for it. But somebody was mentioning that it actually resulted in higher instances of sexuality and erections and things like that. So there was at least one that in one case study, someone said that someone said this happened. But for you,
it's still another source of stress. I mean, the classic stereotype is that men have a higher libido than women anyway. I'm not sure how accurate that is, but that's the stereotype. And then when that's thrown into overdrive, you feel like you're constantly harassing your partner.
I'd like to sound off on that real quick, where before I lose my train of thought. Oh, there we go, the sexuality thing. Yes, I mean, as we mentioned, testosterone does have to do with the sort of heightened libido. But my theory on this whole situation is that men and women, once again, process things differently. And we have this kind of what I would see as projection of women saying, "Oh, men aren't in touch with their feelings; they don't know what's happening." It's like, well, no, actually, in my experience, from what I've seen, men don't. They have a tipping point, and they don't really know what's wrong sometimes, and they're kind of pissed, but they're just shrugging it off or whatever. And then once they figure out what that fucking thing is, they're like, okay, I'm hungry, I'm angry, I'm horny, I'm tired, like there's a thing and I feel it and I need to deal with that. While I think women kind of have a variety of emotions happening at all times, and I don't think that they're muted in the same way. And there's not necessarily a tipping point. There's just so many of them that it kind of becomes white noise of stuff constantly kind of like going on the inside, especially the more feminine brained women that have like slightly more chaotic approaches and brain patterns to things. Well, not brain patterns, but we'll get into that in a little bit, the male versus female approaches and ways of thinking and things like that. But because there is this chaotic sort of ocean of things, women may pick up certain instances that made them sad, or things that stick out the most, or things that made them upset. Sometimes if there was like a pretty salient event, but for the most part, it seems to me that women don't really realize the source of their emotion and their anxiety. They will feel sad, they will feel depressed, they will feel emotional. They can't pinpoint one particular thing, or they will just act out and they don't really know, I don't know why I did that. And that's actually one of the things that was observed in the studies they did for stress between men and women, that aggression, actually, specifically irritability or anger, was greater in women than it was in men. So there are certain behaviors, or feeling as though you could cry, and feeling depressed or sad, or like headaches or whatever, or lack of energy. A lot of these things were reported, or upset stomach, like all of these things were reported higher by women because they just feel this badness and they can't really necessarily place it perfectly. I think that goes for sex drive. I think women actually have a high sex drive and a need for, or I mean, obviously not all women, but in general, they have a higher sex drive than we give them credit for. But I think there's an issue wrapped in all that, with that women don't realize that they're horny. They don't know they don't know that they need it. They don't realize what's happening, and they just feel bad. And a lot of times an orgasm, and lesbians know this actually, Lily Kate can confirm that, and I can confirm personally that you have that orgasm and it's like your crazy meds. It is that medicine that makes you not be crazy anymore, as you're just going apeshit and you don't know what's happening, and then you have a release of an orgasm and you're like, oh wow, I feel so much fucking better. I just needed to have sex. I had no idea. But once again, there are different approaches in how men and women look at sex. Women are very, like people say, men's sexual organ is their eyes, because they're visually stimulated, which I think a lot of women are as well. Women love butts and abs and Thor's hair and whatever, but there's more to it than that. It has to be Thor's hair, not just some random dudes. But for a guy, it's like, oh, hey, that's a beautiful chick. I don't care who she is, where she's from, what she thinks about me. Come here. I mean, I'm simplifying, of course. But for women, they say the sexual organ is actually the ears, and that's a Russian thing. That for men it's the eyes, for women it's the ears, because compliments and like not sweet talk, but role playing, so to speak, is actually a big part of female sexuality in my experience, which is why 50 Shades of Grey is so popular and things like that. Women like to read their porn, and they like to mentalize and kind of have a experience of like a cinematographic, glamorous or whatever, heightened sort of storyline. And they really kind of crave a different stimulation than men. On top of that, I noticed in my own personal life and just in general, exposure to sexualized behavior is fascinatingly amazing for increasing your libido. And I'm not talking about porn. I am not talking about porn, because I think as women, us as women who are perhaps more competitive, or the ones that have self-esteem issues, and I'm both of those, there is kind of an element of competition with the women on the screen. And feeling like I'm not good like that, I don't look like that, my butt's not as good, so you have those approaches because our brain tends anyway, women just have that sort of approach to porn. Sometimes I think why they push it away, they have a lot of conflicted feelings, and their self-esteem and worth as a woman in this very narrow hierarchical primitive sense is challenged, and they cannot let go of that to enjoy the actual activity, which is, I think, why women choose DPs, gangbangs, and well, like specifically actually threesome, DP, and gay porn is what women watch and search for. And I think that seeing two men together removes that element of competition with a woman, but it still maintains the sexual aspect of like the raw penis, yes, excite sexual thing. And so, but for most normal people and normal women and even slightly abnormal women, I think things like not specifically Game of Thrones, because everybody's like crying or dying when they're having sex, but a show like Vikings. I also hear the Borgias has, I haven't watched it, but I hear it has a lot of sex scenes. I think shows like that are particularly powerful for awakening female sexuality because it shows people in a sexual context, but it gives the clues or the cues of what is happening in a way that women appreciate it, which is like changes in breathing that indicate an emotional response, which is what women crave. I mean, there's this saying that guys just want a trophy on their wall and to move on, and that's not been my experience at all. In my experience, guys want a steady girlfriend forever and ever. The first one they meet, they're ready to marry her for the rest of his fucking life. While women, once they get an approval of a man, such as going on a date or getting a phone number or whatever, or sleeping with him, I don't know, whatever her benchmark is for getting that approval, she'll be like, okay, great, that's a great notch on my belt. Next one, please. So
let's actually. James has a good point. Let's hear Kat's take on the sexuality of women from her perspective. If Kat is still there, Kat may not still be there. Okay, Kat is not there.
I was just thinking, she's being
I
being
forgot
quiet.
to unmute my mic. I'm still here. So women and sexual. I mean, honestly, I think Anna just summed up most of my thoughts on it. So I don't really have much to add to that.
Well, as a writer of erotica and someone who kind of deals with, you yourself are, adult talent, and you also write erotic works. So in that sense, do you cater your works to men or women, or do you just write something that appeals to you? And, would you agree that sometimes watching straight up porn might cause feelings that you're not, like, you don't understand what's happening, but you don't really like it, and it makes you feel bad or whatever. But then watching something more abstract that has a storyline and like people sighing and doing like fun things like that with implied sexuality, is that something that gets you off more than more raunchy stuff?
I am definitely more into erotica than visual porn. I prefer 100% to read my porn rather than watch my porn. I actually almost only masturbate 2 words while I'm reading. When I do watch porn, I look at it more from a curiosity perspective. I'm looking at the cinematography and the angles and things like that, probably just because I have a performance background. And so it's difficult for me to separate myself from that. In terms of writing, I typically do write for a male audience, but only because generally the people buying my erotica are male people, and I want them to enjoy what they're buying from me. But that doesn't mean I also don't enjoy it, because I just really like writing sexy things.
So it seems like there's kind of like a requirement of feeling in a story, and when you're like watching porn, for instance, you may not feel like you're part of the story as much as when, like, for instance, watching something that's what Cherry was mentioning was that we're watching like Vikings or whatever, where you're kind of drawn into the story. You may not literally see yourself in that place, but you're drawn into a story that has sexuality in it, and so perhaps that's kind of the more the appeal, that you kind of have to feel part of a drama.
Yeah, perhaps. Watching a porn that has a storyline would probably get to me more than porn without, although I can easily get turned on by just little sexy images that I happen to be scrolling past on Tumblr.
Yeah, it seems to make sense that there wouldn't be just a complete binary where it's one or the other, but a little bit of both. Whereas there's kind of a preference for one side or the other, because of course men are the same, same thing, being more drawn into, a story where like Cherry was mentioning, like the breathing and things like that.
Hmm.
Men can certainly be turned on by things that have absolutely, don't even have to have nudity. It can, just have, people who are passionately into what they're doing, and that can do it for men, of course, as well. So there's I think maybe it's just kind of a proclivity more than a binary.
Yeah, and I did read somewhere that goes with what Anna was saying earlier about how men are primarily turned on by their eyes and their nose, while women are primarily turned on by their ears and the physical sensation of touch. And that's definitely true for me. But the study also said that most people are they're somewhere in the middle. They're a blend of feminine and masculine traits when it comes to being turned on. Just that those were a generic tendency.
Right, and of course, we're talking about also warm up, or sort of like when you're completely cold, sober, not turned on, and you're like going
Right.
into a world and you're like, oh, this suddenly turns me on. Versus when you possibly are already turned on and you're just wanting to like orgasm. I will personally skip past all the bullshit parts of dialogue in my hentai and go to the action when I'm like trying to masturbate. But at the same time, there is this interesting thing you mentioned about Tumblr photos. I'm a big fan of reblogging Tumblr porn on one of my two accounts, and something about just the static image, and frequently in black and white too. It's like, what the fuck is this? This is really, really strange.
Black
But
and white
then,
makes it classy.
it's right. It's the difference between porn and art is the lighting and vases, having vases.
It's
That's
definitely the basis.
it's a Terry Pratchett skit.
Nice aspidistra makes all the difference.
So as we were talking, there are male and female differences in terms of sexual, or a male brain or female brain differences in how you experience sexuality and what body parts turn you on, and or what parts you like touched and things like that, or don't like touched. And I think that really goes to, in my experience, and Kat's too, because we're not necessarily on the same spectrum of, gender. Like, I don't think Kat and I are necessarily in the same area of being more towards the masculine or towards the feminine. I mean, we complement each other well, but I think I perhaps might tend more towards the masculine side, and she has a more empathetic, like more female sort of minded things there. So that kind of leads into this big thing that I want to hear about, and that I want people to hear about, because I've heard it and I agree with it and I love it. But of the approach of seeing the male sided or the female sided thinking in everyday life or just world in general.
Okay, well, there's yeah, it's really kind of ever since you were first going to university, and was attending some of the classes there, et cetera. I've been interested in everything from depression to well, you name it, about the way that the brain works, and and going back to like for instance, the SSRIs. There have been studies showing that SSRIs do impact hormones, and then the hormones then in turn impact the brain. So there's always these feedback loops, and so one of the things that we were talking about very early on in the podcast was the way in which certain nucleus, I think it was the medial preoptic area, how it's impacted, it's specifically by hormones, can change, mounting behavior, can change, the sexual behaviors of an animal, and of course the same thing with humans. So all this kind of comes down to a perspective about the brains in which, instead of looking at people, there's definitely dimorphism. I mean, that's something we the fact that we can't even talk about that is just absurd. And I've kind of just we're past all those people who can't accept that brains are sexually dimorphic. It's just a scientific fact. There is and that dimorphism goes beyond just sexual behavior. It has to do with the ways in which we conceive things. And having a fear of difference is actually a really bad way of doing things. It doesn't. Whenever you fear difference, somehow you are basically believing that one thing is necessarily specifically better than the other, and that's just kind of a simplistic. It's a simpleton's viewpoint, is what it is. So, but going back to the spectrum of male to female, I think it's one of the things that I can bring out with some studies and things like that in a more technical environment. Perhaps, like I said, on a follow-up show or something like that, I'll just like list tons of studies on how these different brain areas and these how the larger picture of what I'm trying to get at here will come together. I can support it more specifically, but when it comes down to looking at the way that the human brain works, if you look at it from kind of a problem-solving perspective, there are a few different things. If you look at the development of brains as from I'm a software engineer, and so in a past life for over a decade, and the idea of attempting to solve a problem comes up with you end up with these different things that are necessary. And for instance, if you look at it in a matter of like processing time, one of the things that I always use as a very simple example that anyone can understand is if you have say you have 100 slots of processing time, and there's 100 slots wide by 100 slots deep, and you only have 100 points of processing, and there is in one of those slots in that 100 by 100 grid, there is something you need to find. Is it best to go put 100 units of processing into one slot, or is it best to put 1 unit of processing into 100 slots, or is it better to have a mix? And when it comes down to it, it has to do with searching. And there's a very general precept that you'll find in the way that nature works, that there is this, it's not just a balance of putting just as many into depth as you do into breadth, but actually a wave going back and forth between depth and breadth. And this kind of has to do with the male and female mind. And when I talk about the male and female mind, I'm talking about extremely, when you go all the way to the extremes of what you might consider feminine and the extremes of what you might consider masculine. And there's very few people who actually fit those extremes, because I think that everyone you have to have these predominantly male and predominantly female characteristics in every mind for it to work properly. Now, I think that, I know that the more pedantic, getting down to very specifics, that is a more masculine mind. It's one of the things that you find in autism is that it is a hypermasculinization. There is changes to the amygdala. There are things that basically it's a type of specialization in which like autism itself is, for instance, is a spectrum. You have everything from somebody who's actually autistic to people who are more Asperger's, and then there are people who are just more nerdy. And what it comes down to is the ability to focus upon simplification and details. And one of the things that James brought up earlier was how that just these changes in serotonin, which the person was taking antidepressants, it changed their sculptures from being excuse me, let's change their sculptures from being very complex type of sculptures to the more simple type of sculptures. Now, simple is not bad. That is, you need to be able to focus. You need to be able to get down to something in particular. Otherwise, you're stuck in analysis paralysis. That's one of the things that it's so difficult to get across to people. Is like whenever you start arguing for having some depth, they're like they start saying, well, then you want to go 100 points deep in one slot. No, I don't. And then when you start arguing for breadth and saying, well, then they assume that you mean that you want to put 1 point of processing into 100 slots. And no, I don't want that either. And because those are the two simple ways that we often kind of look at the way that the brain may work is we always try to pick one or the other, but there's a wave and there's a balance between them. But so like you were saying, the changes in serotonin, which we associate with more feminine brains, have more serotonin, and what you end up finding is that there is a breadth type of perspective that is associated with serotonin, and so you end up having that's why when I was talking about this kind of this type of depressed artist archetype that seems like kind of a cliche. Well, there's a reason why that's a cliche, because there is a mechanism behind it that where the depression in especially in males leads to a slightly more feminized brain, and a more feminized brain is one that looks at complexity more. But at the same time, one of the things that you'll find is a depressed person or a person who has a tremendous amount of serotonin, a lot of times that they are the kind that will get stuck in analysis paralysis. They will be looking at too many different things and won't take that, okay, screw all that other stuff, let's focus on this one thing and move forward. Doesn't matter if it's wrong, I'm just moving forward. And that's the thing, is that, well, then you also have the more masculine brain, which it's just like, we're picking this one thing and we're confidently moving forward, and you'll go straight right into the arms of hell, just marching straight forward, not looking in side to side, because you got to make progress, and sometimes you're making too much progress in completely the wrong direction. So you have these complementary aspects to the brain. So a lot of times I try to, whenever I'll vaguely kind of reference these two aspects of the human brain that are that work in conjunction with each other. And it's, like I said, it's kind of a problem solving thing. And so I believe that what happens with male brains when they are depressed is that they are getting that complexity, that additional level of complexity that's necessary. But I think it's supposed to be part of a wave. In other words, where you drop down into that more complex, looking at all the options, reintegrating all this many different perspectives and viewpoints and all of those things. But then it's supposed to come back to the more masculine viewpoint, which is, okay, now that I've looked at all these things, I can't put my effort towards everything. It's impossible. I'm one human being. I have one set of resources. I have one amount of energy, and I have to focus and put it in something. And then I think that's when the depression starts to come to an end, when the men are capable of getting more back to that masculine mindset of cutting off all of the extras and making that leap to go forward, which is actually, that's one of the things that has to do with leadership. You have to be able to make those mistakes. You have to be able to take that risk of just moving forward and cutting off all of the different possibilities, because there's like an infinite number of things that could possibly go wrong, and there's all these different considerations. You have to be able to continue to just move forward and focus on that one path and try to make it happen, which of course goes back to what Cherry was talking about when it comes to having you look at the berries and the different colors of things to determine if maybe it's going to make you sick, and picking out all these different things. Well, that's really important from that perspective, when you're in ancient times, or as opposed to when you're a hunter and you're like, okay, no, we need to pick that one, we need to stick with it and run it down and kill it. You can see these things, this wave between generalization and specialization throughout nature in the way that animals develop in evolution, where they have in areas where there are more resources. You have a lot of animals that develop behaviors that aren't necessarily directly necessary for their survival, such as like the elaborate feathers and elaborate mating rituals and all these different attempts that you can basically kind of see nature having two aspects of a mind, whether it be you have the tropical rainforest, in which all these different perspectives are capable of being looked at, and then you have the desert, in which only the most specific effective thing can be used. But then what you lose in focusing in the desert on what's the most effective is all of the different possible paths of exploration. In other words, like for instance, if the desert were to change slightly, the super specialized niches that all of those animals have perfected, the slightest change to them could kill them off entirely. Whereas in the rainforest, huge changes can happen, and because there's so many different species, you end up having all of these different niches that they can now fill because there are a lot of different species. Now, this is a metaphor for how our brains are attempt to solve problems. You see it in nature itself. So like I said, I'll get to some studies, etc., that point out exactly how this masculine versus feminine mindset exists in each one of us. But it's interesting if you can look at it from that perspective. I think then you start to see how that male and female roles and dimorphism and things like that play an interdependent role. That even though we may be to one side or the other of that mental spectrum, in what we gain in specialization, we lose in generalization. What we gain in a breadth of view, we lose in the picking up the specifics. And you can see this from the artistic. When you're more of an artist, you deal a little more in generalities. You deal with more inaccuracy. It's not, you don't have to have that mathematical perfection. You don't have to have that. It's not the same thing. When you're being more artistic, you're allowing a lot more generality, a lot more error, a lot of things that are not specifically perfectly matching. Whereas so then when you're like a mathematician, you can't. When you're a mathematician, you got to get down to the nitty gritty details. You can't miscalculate it. The slightest miscalculation in certain applications completely destroys them. It doesn't work at all. And so I think that realizing that we have a give and take when we're moving across that spectrum is crucially important, and being able to respect both of those mindsets and realize that that people lay along that spectrum for good reason, I think is really helpful. And I think that whenever we're mentalizing and whenever we're trying to achieve our own kind of mental health, that recognizing that whatever we lose in one area we gain in another, and being okay with that, and then being able to adjust from one place to the other is I think that that's very helpful. And I think that there's a tremendous amount of scientific data to back up this specific viewpoint. So anyhow, I hope that kind of gets across what I was talking about.
It very much does. Yeah, you can also mute your thingy directly.
Okay.
Yeah. Anyway, we're in the same space, so there's a bit of, I don't know if you guys can hear it. I can hear myself echoing through the through his insanely good mic. But that was a perfect segue. Talking about sort of more masculine brains, or rather more feminine brains is what I guess we're gonna call them, of the creative types, and the more sort of artists, as you're mentioning, and here in chat we're discussing with Kat and James that perhaps there is some sort of approach to reading or writing, probably reading erotica specifically, and going off of your earlier point that men can also be aroused by not directly, oh my god, in your face boner situation or vagina. In fact, I've had clients who are like, just tease me for a while, like give me the striptease, don't just get straight to it. But I think that ties into something that James was saying, that there is an element of wanting to be involved, of wanting to be in the scene. There's a POV, point of view porn is a big thing, and we have in my experience anyway, there's a lot of ways of jerk off instructions and like joy type porn and other custom videos that people request, that has to do with specifically one-on-one attention between you and the person who's the man who's on the other side of the screen. So being wanted is, to me, generally a very common thing that men actually, that's how their sex drive kind of goes, is they want to be desired. So a higher level of excitation and things like that will certainly, I can see that being a catalyst for arousal. But there's also, going back to the artist thing, that there does seem to be more of an acceptance, obviously, of homosexuality and things like that in our society. And there's even now, we're starting to accept bisexuality in men specifically as well. But you don't have to be bisexual or gay in order to have a more feminized way of thinking, a more feminized rather brain or whatever. It is associated with artistic, language, creative abilities that is more of the right side of the brain, which is dominant in women, versus logic, which is the left side of the brain, is more dominant in men. So we see this parallel or this fractal of the hemispheres, the left and the right, as they have to do with being in the brain and they kind of have one side is masculine, the other side is feminine. And then we have within, and that makes the individual more masculine or feminine. And then within relationships and within groups, we also have more masculine leaning or more feminine leaning behaviors. So it's kind of a fractal thing that seems to permeate a lot of humanness. So we're talking about in our little chat here about writing and being kind of responsive to reading erotica also as a writer or just in general. I would like to get back to Kat and James about the being a writer and that whole thing, but really quickly, I'd like to add information about reading fiction, and that is it does create empathy. It makes people basically more empathetic and nicer and better people after they have, like, if they read fantasy or basically fiction. It doesn't have to be fantasy, it just has to be fictional work. So going through the motions of, or specifically, because going through the motions usually associates with faking it, but I mean going through the experiences of the character that you read and being with them and understanding what drives them, understanding what drives a variety of other characters, because a lot of times writing that actually
Is her mic cutting out for everyone
Yeah,
else?
just dropped out.
Try again.
All right. How much of that did you guys miss?
A lot of it. Sorry.
Okay. It's all right. Okay. Well, mainly I was saying that we have these trains of thought that are lost, is what we have. I was citing two examples of masculine and feminine thinking, and okay, I don't know if you guys heard about the fractal thing, but that doesn't necessarily matter because I'll be moving on more into the writing stuff. And people who read fiction actually have greater empathy, evidence of greater empathy than people who read nonfiction or people who don't read at all. So reading a fantasy or a fictional story actually improves your ability to relate to other people. I think a lot of that has to do with going through the process of the character, the main character, and the variety of, sometimes more than one character. So you're going through a variety of experiences and you're understanding the motivations and the internal emotions of these people that you're reading about. So not only is it a meditative, process and is just good for you in general, but you are actually developing theory of mind based on reading about the different characters and how they react to things, and that has been shown to increase empathy and intelligence. And we also have evidence of more, so of course, of empathy, we're talking about more feminine qualities. And there's also been evidence of men who have higher, who have more female-like brains, and even homosexual men, which have brains more like women. We've seen those studies that they activate, a gay man's brains activate a lot more like women's than men's, straight men's, that is. And having that, myelin is actually a big part of homosexual male brains, which is also a big part of the female brain, and it has to do with plasticity and ability to change, and it does add to a certain type of intelligence, to an intelligence. It's not necessarily what Richard was saying earlier, it's not like one of those focused, down the line, practical, linear, cause and effect sort of situation that men, kind of more masculinized brains tend to think in those patterns, but it's a more seeing the patterns and everything, looking at the broad spectrum and picking out patterns and evaluating a new information or finding new information based on a lot of different thresholds that other information reached, that you have like these basically patterns.
It's concurrent processing versus linear processing. We had a very good example of it earlier when we were talking about SSRIs. They know exactly what down at the freaking atomic level practically, they know what is happening. But the problem is that is that kind of linear processing. That is the way that they are using their search algorithm algorithm right now is through linear processing, but they're not using concurrent processing, which means that they're not connecting all of the different things that they have found all throughout the medical industry and throughout all of the studies. There's not a good way to connect all that information and make it interact properly so that you've got this really broad perspective of exactly how these mechanisms, what they mean and what the cascades, what the neurochemical cascades end up creating, and how that they impact emotions, how that they create specific thoughts. All of those things require a concurrent processing type of breadth search that is not the same as the depth search that we focus on right now in biology. And so that is a very good example of what you're trying to elucidate there, I guess.
Yes, definitely. And that kind of ties back to what James was saying here in chat, where we're talking about reading erotica and having an experience from it that also works for men, but that might be because of being less gender typical for a man. So what are your thoughts on that, James?
I think maybe that's it. Like we keep saying, everyone exists somewhere on a spectrum, and we're only talking about very sort of broad masculine tendencies and broad feminine tendencies. But yeah, I've written some erotica, though there's less call for it being written by men, I think. And I also find it more involving than watching porn. It connects more. And what I think that comes down to is this kind of element of interactivity. When you were talking, looking at porn is very passive, but then I was thinking about it while you were talking, and the point of view stuff is more involving because it's like you're being talked to, and the act of reading, because you're engaged in using your imagination to picture the scene and so on, it feels more interactive. You're more involved. And then, further on from that, you can look at things like, custom clips from cam girls, or cyber sex, things like that. That takes you to that point where it's fully interactive. And I think that's kind of what's missing in a lot of porn is that sense of human connection and interactivity. Because when you make love to somebody, even if they're tied up or whatever, it's still an interactive experience. That there's feedback to it, and that's what's missing from the kind of the passive experience of porn. At least speaking for myself, that's why the written word is more appealing and has more of an effect for me. I think if that's more perfectionist, so be it.
Simplified porn is kind of that. It is kind of a hyper masculination. It's too simple. There's not enough breadth to it.
Yeah, it's mechanical, which is all very well for getting off, but it leaves an itch unscratched.
Is anyone else hearing Cherry? Because apparently she seems to be having some sort of connection problem. Yeah, somehow she's got a serious connection problem. Test something out again. See if we can hear you. Yep, we're still not getting anything. Let's see.
I think we're back.
Oh, there we go.
There she is.
There you are.
I finally heard Richard Rall's voice coming through the microphone for me, because everything disappeared. Like, I couldn't hear anyone. I actually thought James cut out, and I was like, oh no, did we lose James? And then you guys couldn't hear me, and it was a tiny little clusterfuck. But if you were kind of wrapped up with that, what you wanting to say, James, I think what you were leading into speaking about the POV, or interactive rather, experience is something that actually Kat was mentioning in chat. So take it away, Kat, if you'd like. About like the stuff.
Now that we're all talking about sexuality in a podcast about depression, let's kind of join the two. James is talking about being involved in the writing process and in the erotica, and how that made it better for him. And I've noticed that a lot of guys will seek out professional sex workers, prostitutes, cam girls, pro doms, whatever, specifically for the intimacy and the emotional connect. It's not just about the sex. You see that a lot where with pro-doms and other sex workers offering counseling and therapy sessions. And I'm even considering going through that degree myself, just so I actually have that degree when I have clients who ask me for a therapy session. I think it's very interesting and very sad that men are stigmatized more for seeking out a licensed mental health professional than they are for paying for sexual services.
Yeah, definitely. It's funny how there's it's just like men can't express themselves through crying, but they're allowed to be angry. There's so many different structures around the way a man is supposed to behave, and how they're either thrown away or accepted based upon very very fine lines.
Well, there's actually even issues with men being able to express anger. We are moving away even from that sort of coping mechanism that men had, and we're getting to the point of people decrying toxic masculinity, and all the shooters are men, which that's not even true. But they're also completely ignoring the role that perhaps women in these people's lives have played on their behavior. Because I mean, men and women are the only two species of human that we have. We can only relate with each other, and we do constantly relate with each other all the time. And you can't just say it's a one-way street when there's two players. It does go back and forth. And I think it's a fascinating point that you brought up, Kat, that people feel like it's basically better for a man to it's more acceptable for a man to have a sex drive and to pay a woman for sex, rather than for men to have emotional vulnerabilities like women do and humans do in general. And I'm not sure exactly where I wanted to go from here, but I did have something on the pro-dom counseling sort of experience. I think here it is. I believe it was a local Oakland sex worker, prostitute, who mentioned that some people come in just to unload. They want to just talk and kind of have basically a therapy session, not any kind of cognitive behavior or anything you need a license for, but just somebody to listen. And we have, of course, the example of Catcher in the Rye, where I mean he was young, but the kind of whole situation with spoilers, the whole situation with him with Holden purchasing a prostitute there. And then she arrives, and he kind of wanted to lose his virginity or do like the sexual thing. So he has like sex on his mind, basically. I'm just going to do this. And then when she arrives, he just wants to talk. And it's, I think, a very big misunderstood thing about men that they just want sex, and that, yeah, sexual desirability is a really big part of male self-esteem. And until they have it, or unless it's been taken away, you don't necessarily think of it as something that affects their mental well-being, but it does. Being desired and feeling desirable is one of the most important things for men to feel young and healthy in that way. So we have the situation where men actually want companionship. They actually want to be with someone for a long time. They have devotion, and yes, they do have a sex drive that they're perhaps more aware of than women, and sometimes they will take sex as a expression of love and intimacy, because there are like 5 different ways in which human beings recognize being loved or cared for, and some of them like to be given gifts, others like to be physically touched, others like to be told things. So there's different ways in which people feel loved and appreciated, and sometimes sex will do that. I think for men it is like, yes, she wants me sexually, this is great, I'm awesome, everything's good. But a lot of times, in my experience, and what you guys are saying about porn, or you, James, are about porn lacking something, and a lot of people in chat also do mention that there is this kind of, porn doesn't necessarily do it for them. Even I have people that are like, hey, I love you, I would like to watch your stuff, but like porn doesn't really do it for me. So I think there's a lot to the male need to be loved and to be interacted with and to be personally desired by a woman, not just necessarily watch some people doing stuff, which has a sexual arousal all to its own. But I feel like men more overwhelmingly want relationships. if that makes any sense. I mean, I think some men push away from relationships because, or are seem to push away, or are seen as pushing away because of the negatives and the walking on eggshells and having, they basically see all the worst that relationships can bring. And so they're like, oh no, fuck that. I don't want anything to do with that when they're younger. But as time goes on, I've seen multiple people confess. They're like, I'm so many years old and I haven't had a kiss, and all I want is just a girlfriend forever. And other guys are like, yeah, I've been a man whore my whole life, and no, I want a stable somebody to love me every night. So all across the walks of life and sexuality types, it seems men ultimately arrive at, sooner or later, arrive at needing female companionship. And does that ring true for you guys?
Well, no, it's true for me.
Yeah, I think so. Is it a function of age, though? I don't know. I don't know if I'm convinced by that. I think there's more pressure on you when you're younger to kind of play the field and show off your virility. But plenty of people hook up young and stay hooked up. So I don't know whether it's an innate thing or a societal thing. There, I'd have to think about it more.
Yeah, I think it's just companionship. I think it's just kind of basically human. I mean, it's really all there is to it. I think all of us, need companionship in one form or another. And trying to get it just from a group, or trying to get it from well, first off, when you're a guy, there's only a certain level of intimacy allowed with other guys. You can't, there's a level.
Yeah.
There's only a certain level that you can, certain lines you just can't cross. You can't talk about. And so that's one of the things that I think that's why there's. When a person doesn't necessarily want a relationship, but they want to also be able to cross those lines. That's why sometimes you end up having the prostitute or the sex worker of whatever kind that is also a therapist, because it's somebody they can talk to and cross those lines with, and that for the companionship that they need. But go ahead.
Yeah, that's I think it's so. I just lost my train of thought and then got it again. Awesome. You guys were saying something that I wanted to interject. Only in Western cultures, because in Asian cultures and in Middle Eastern cultures, I mean, maybe I don't really know those all that well, that are specifically like super Middle East, but like the more outlying ones that are closer to Russia and all of those, and Asia, there are elements of male bonding that are still allowed to have. Like men take saunas together and they're like just fucking butt ass naked there. Men hold hands in I don't remember if it was Asian or Middle Eastern country. I think it was in actually Pakistan. There were men just walking down the street and they're holding hands, and that's something that I used to do with my girlfriends, with my friends that were girls, as a young child in Russia too, or as a teenager. It's just one of those companionship, friendship things that moving to America has kind of obliterated all that. There is a tremendous amount of sterility involved in human relations. I mean, we've gotten to the point where schools in the Mid-South and maybe other areas too, but in like Mississippi specifically, they were banning children from being able to touch each other on the playground. Forget wrestling, forget playing tag. You literally cannot lay a finger on another child without them calling parents and creating a big issue about it. So not only have simple actions between same-sex people like holding hands or hugging, or Italian men, they kiss each other on the cheek. Russian men, they also, after drinking usually, or some older ones will kiss each other on the cheek. It's just one of the, or actually both cheeks. It's like
in some cultures, it's okay for men to kiss each other on the lips without the slightest bit of homosexuality part of it.
I believe it is actually specifically French culture. We were watching a specific thing that illustrated that. It was, I believe, in the police department where a guy went around and gave everybody a kiss on the lips. And it was just a guy kissing other guys. So these things are completely normal in other sides of the world, because you understand that there's a difference between platonic need for companionship and sexual arousal to someone. While in America specifically, maybe also in Britain, since we are your bastard child, there is kind of an element culturally, I mean, and otherwise, there is an element of sexualizing things that aren't sexualized elsewhere, because we live, I think, in such a puritanical, sterile situation where people don't see each other nude or half nude or in any way are exposed to the humanity of each other, to the skin of each other, touching the skin, looking at skin. Yet we know from evidence that human physical touch is something that can help AIDS patients and actually regain their appetite and not waste away as much. And has to do with a variety of other studies that have proven that human touch alone is something that even like
No, it can
primates.
make it can make the difference between life and death for children that are born premature. Just properly touching them, can literally be the difference between whether that child lives or dies. There's just so many different ways in which we are absolutely dependent upon human contact. I mean, and even here in the U.S., where we've gotten more and more into this gender binary and homophobia, there's gotten where you can look at these older pictures and men were touching way more than they do now. And now, I feel the being not wanting to touch any other guy's thing. I know it's unhealthy. It's one of those things where it's funny because I consider myself more towards the feminine spectrum of males. However, I don't have the slightest homosexual urge. It's not and whereas I'm completely okay with guys that are homosexual. It's like I think that's a completely natural and it's so automatic in so many different people's cases. It's kind of an irrelevant thing. And so it was one of those things that even when I was understanding my more feminine aspects within myself, that immediately I'm like, oh my god, I fear that I'm homosexual in some way, and it's just ridiculous. We just have this idea of a binary person that just doesn't match reality. And it's when we have these dumb ideas that are so ingrained that we end up, if through fear, we end up avoiding looking at them, and then end up not finding that there was nothing to fear in the first place. And so it leads to these bad systems where we're if you're not this crazy weird masculine archetype that nobody actually exists as, then you're worthless. I mean, it's just ridiculous how badly we screw ourselves over.
Yeah, and you combine that fear of maybe undermining your own performative sexuality with a sense of propriety and not wanting to show weakness, and that definitely the combination of the three definitely prevents men from being emotionally intimate, let alone anything else.
Well, that's the thing too. I think might have something to do with the prevalence of the particular toxic brand of Southern Baptism, the Calvinism, in America. There is a tremendous amount of homophobia and things like that from the more regressive far right type of movements or ideologies. I'm not really sure why we still hold on to this idea, this gender binary of human beings have to be this way, and they have to behave in this way, or they don't deserve their label of their gender. And it's I think it is one of those cases of our instincts still not catching up with our civilization. And the interesting thing about the touch thing, or not so interesting, I guess, but quite sad. As we elucidated, there are ways in which human touch is extremely important, and yet there's a marked absence of touch for men. Not only are men not touching each other because of what we just described, but also women aren't necessarily touching men because that's just never been the traditional go-to thing. I mean, we've all been raised with the whole, girls don't go after boys. Boy is supposed to call you. He's supposed to take you on a date. So the boys are the initiators, and that's kind of how it's been for a long time, and that's kind of how it's been approached and addressed. It's like the more aggressive masculine thing to go after a woman, and it's her more feminine thing to be taken. And I think that is really destructive, or at least it's resulted in that, in combination with the puritanical society we're living in, that really resulted in men not being touched ever by anyone, almost ever. There are people who go without hugs for a variety of years because not all families are super warm and huggy, so you don't necessarily can get it even from your family. Like, what are you, a fag? You need a hug? Like, what is that? What are you, 2 years old? So from that perspective, we have men being denied touch because it's not masculine to be a human, I guess. And from the other side, we have women not paying men compliments, women not touching men, women not initiating, showing sexual attraction towards men or any kind of attraction. And
Yeah,
I
you want
think,
to talk about objectification. Basically, men are more like these an object that has no needs, it has no wants, it has no weaknesses. It's just this block of wood. You know, that's the idea of men that is kind of, I don't know, just ambient in our culture is so ridiculous.
yeah, it's needs to be a strong decoupling from love being a basic human need and that being associated with weakness. We unfortunately have not tackled that last element on the hierarchy of needs. We are okay with food, water, and shelter being absolutely necessary, and nobody is seen as weak or less than because they need those things to live. Well, it's scientifically proven you need human touch to live. You need love. You need self-actualization in that sense. You need to feel wanted by someone. Doesn't matter if it's another man, if it's a group of people, if it's a woman, if it's like your partner, just somebody who wants you to live. And I think that's one of the other reasons we see a really high suicide rate among men is there's very few people who actually reach out to men and say, you're valuable, you as a person are valuable. A lot of times some guys will not commit suicide because their whole family relies on them monetarily, and they know that if they're gone, his family's gonna basically not know what to do, and so there's that duty. And that's one of the only ways, speaking of objectification, that's one of the only ways in which men are valued by their family sometimes even, and strangers and people around them, is how much money they make. What do they provide monetarily? Because that's really the only metric that we have currently for evaluating male awesomeness, or evaluating anything about a man. The only thing that anyone ever basically mentions is like, what's his job, how much does he make? That is it. And because of that, some men will actually feel the pressure of like, well, I can't leave my family. But I think that also leads to a lot of other men being like, well, so I'm completely replaceable. I am an ATM machine. Nobody actually wants me to be here. They want a provider, but they don't want me. And so I think there's a lot in that that we need to address via realizing or being open with people and spreading why the information that love is a need to survive. You need love to survive. And I think we can really change some things by empowering women to give men compliments and to reach out and touch men and to hug men. It doesn't, I mean, the reason why a lot of these hugs and friend zone situations happen, men are starved for touch. They're starved for love. They're starved for attention. And a lot of times smiling and talking and being best friends with a guy, that's what you do in a relationship. And guys don't really, they're confused. They're like, what the fuck? What is this friend zone? I don't understand. How can she give me all those elements of companionship but not the sex bit? I don't understand. And a lot of that has to do from us not giving men attention and compliments and love on a platonic basis. Just go up to a random person and hug them. I mean, if there's a guy walking down the street that says free hugs, and there's a girl walking down the street that says free hugs, who do you think is going to get hugged more? I mean, it's very bizarre and unfortunate, because that's one of the issues that men actually suffer from the most: fear of rejection. It's like the two main things that Warren Farrell was talking about last time he was on the show, that women have this body image issues, and men have rejection issues. And so whenever he has workshops, he gives women tasks. Well, he gives the men a task of like one of the 100 or something that he has that have to do with feeling objectified for your body, with your thoughts and feelings and opinions as a person not mattering, which is what he thinks, what is one of the things that women go through, or women report going through, either way. Which in my experience, you got to meet a rare troglodyte who will be, oh, you lady, go in the kitchen, make me a sandwich. I don't want to hear your mouth flapping. Like most guys are interested in hearing what a girl has to say and hearing her opinion. A lot of guys are interested in the personality aspect. I don't think that's also spoken of all that often, but in my experience, most men who are not hypermasculine, we live in a society where there's gender atypicality everywhere. Everybody is gender atypical for the most part. There are still more like super left and super right, little pockets of people that are hyper feminine and hyper masculine, and they're a vocal minority, but they're minority. Most men actually, in my experience anyway, caveat, they want someone who they share interest with. Therefore, they need to know the personality of the person.
Yeah, most men are not cavemen. I mean, yeah, okay, we are shown a couple of dude bros, on TV, the frat boy, and a lot of times even those that are expressing those extremely masculine ideas, it's just because they're exploring their own place in the world and actually outputting something and trying to believe something about themselves, that is that they think is necessary for their progress and survival in society, and so they're outputting this bullshit hyper masculinized front into the existence of them really actually having those ideas and ideals and being a total fucking caveman that doesn't really even exist that much.
Well, the only thing I would say about that is we actually have toxic masculinity, so to speak, which is what we're describing right now, that is spurned on by toxic femininity. In my experience, it is frequently men don't care about other guys. They don't give a fuck. They want to impress women. They want women to like them. They want women to find them valuable and manly so that they can be chosen for reproductive rights. So you have, especially the more far right, the conservative movement women, they have very strict masculinity ideals that they want their men to conform to.
Men do care about how they're seen as masculine to other guys, though, because that can make the difference between whether you're getting your ass beat or or everybody's cool. And there's men definitely care about the masculinity perception of other men.
I think that might be either an older generation thing or dangerous neighborhood thing, because I think there are areas that are more like cultural centers or intellectual centers where when you're among intelligentsia, like in Russia, and as James was saying about he's not particularly handy with tools. Oh, my biological father, he was an anesthesiologist, so I mean, still a STEM profession, but he had a huge library. He liked to read. He couldn't be bothered to take out the trash. And my grandpa, who is traditionally very masculine and built half of the things I've met growing up, like he built things and made things, and so he was really hands-on. And my biological dad wasn't. He was more of an intelligent person. That was actually a rift between them, and it was, my biological dad was denigrated by my parents, of course, or grandparents, because of being not a man of the house, while for him and for my mom, who were part of a drama troupe, they they were doctors, but also like doing drama on the side, performing in plays, and generally being very artsy, creative, but also like reading, intelligent types. That was their thing. That was like perfectly okay within their group and within that sphere of collegiate university environment, to be a man who is valued for his knowledge as being more. That's how his value is seen. He's seen, instead of being like a brute, idiot, meathead, like football player. Well, we didn't have football players, but like a sportsman, which is like an athlete. Instead of being a meathead athlete, it was always associated with that. Athletes are meatheads, and they're not as valuable as people who wear glasses and read books. That was sort of a really big way of my upbringing. And I think there are some areas in this country, maybe in Britain, other places where the culture itself is a bit more shifted towards the middle, towards the bi spectrum. And it doesn't really have the same far right, like being in the desert, needing to make sure you're not attacked by other roving males. I think that once again we're going back to the rainforest and desert analogy there.
Definitely culture plays a role. Once I left secondary school and went to college, I went to college in a much more sort of middle class, artsy city, Winchester. And the bullying and so on instantly stopped. All that judgment and pressure to be more kind of macho and so on just kind of evaporated after that. So, yeah, I think that's definitely true.
Yeah, it seems like cultures and areas that are more depressed and stressed, and basically where resources are seen more scarce. There's interesting ways in which the scarcity of resources impacts stress hormones, and how those stress hormones then impact other types of hormones to make people behave in certain ways. I mean, neurochemistry is really fascinating when you are able to see some of these neurochemical cascades, and how you can see how just stress itself makes people that makes people more violent, because the way in which their brain activates, it changes, it even changes things epigenetically. It's just really fascinating how biology ends up driving behavior so much. And yeah, I think that is a valid, that it's probably the more stressed areas in which you'll find that hyper masculine type of perspective, because basically it is more like the desert. It is more, you got to cut off everything, and only go with whoever's the strongest. The whoever's the biggest meathead. That's all that matters. That artsy fartsy building tools stuff, screw all that. We got to kill and take, and because that's the only way we're going to survive. We're in the desert here, guys. There's no resources.
And I think we are actually on a path of, so in the society in general, looking at ways in which, or not looking at, but behaving rather, altogether. There's kind of a sense of a desert survival high mode, like atmosphere, environment. I think we, through obviously outside stressors that people have no control over, like, well, the crumbling economy and the impending doom of global warming, and endangered animals and fish and water and all of those terrible things. So maybe there is actual resource crisis coming up, but I mean, it doesn't have to be. That's like one of those things. Self-fulfilling prophecies are massively big, and as much as I have my issues with law of attraction, there are elements of law of attraction that absolutely work. Putting out positive expectations makes you behave in ways and respond to things in ways that actually bring some of those positive things to light. It's just another version of a self-fulfilling prophecy. It's a positive one. And I think we can change a lot of the building tension between some of the groups within the male and female gender, and just the feminine onslaught, the feminist onslaught of the kind of the male being in general, since toxic masculinity is anything that has to do with a man. Even having balls and a smaller butt that forces you to sit with your legs more spread apart, that is seen as some sort of aggression towards women. I mean, they're talking about eye rape now, that like he raped me by looking at me. As I understand that there are things that make you feel uncomfortable, but rape is a very specific fucking definition, and you can't just be using these scare tactics to basically bully men into, I don't know, what, not existing, being women. I don't understand what the goal here is. Ultimately, I think we can do a lot of good by not acting like there are limited resources, by seeing positive things or expecting positive things and thereby bringing them to life. I mean, this goes out to a lot of Mitao, or people who are, or men who are considering being Mitao, because the cards are stacked against them. The most average, or even below average looking woman has more reproductive ability and more wealth, or more opportunities than a man has to be famous and or wealthy to get. Somebody mentioned that in chat, and I absolutely agree with that. At this point, we have, we're so hyping on body positivity and pro-female everything, and anti-male everything in a lot of the vocal media, especially in the media outlets, both written and spoken. So we have kind of a war on men. Not really sure what the point is of all that, but guys do see that. They see that they're not being valued. They see that they are objectified for their money. They're told to not whine if they bring up any kind of male rights issues, and then they're also told, why aren't you emotional enough, whenever men just have different ways of dealing with things. So there's just a lot of anti-male sort of rhetoric that comes out of really vocal places, and people have lost their jobs over it. They've been embarrassed on national and crying on national television because while they should have been celebrating the fact that they landed a rocket Go ahead.
Yeah, I think there's a problem of a lack of mutual respect. I think it comes from that not being able to see that a specialization, in one area leaves a deficit in another. And I think that I think that there's a kind of coming from both sides, both the hypermasculine and the hyperfeminine. Both of them have a innate disrespect for a mental type that, and they do not see the value of that mental type. And because of this constant disrespect for those two mental types, you have these binaries that are constantly trying to basically say, oh, there's only one way of being that is right, and not recognizing that there's a mutual dependency between these two ways of being, that there's these two perspectives. And it's like for instance, yes, I'm completely against how feminism, which when I say feminism, of course I'm referring to the toxic femininity where they're they want to destroy all that is male, and there's just all the vitriol towards males. But at the same time, I also support the truth that there is a lack of feminine perspective in certain aspects of science. And by that I mean specifically, I'm talking about the breadth processing. It has to do with looking at things from a broader perspective, meta-analysis. These things are actually feminine minded. Women tend to be a little better at that than men do. Men tend to be a little more on the the getting to the details and following the linear pursuit. And so I will actually say that there is a necessity and a lack of feminine thought in certain aspects of science, but it's a delicate balance between these different things. And of course we always end up getting unbalanced in one way or another. And if we could just get to a point at which we're I think that when there is a mutual respect for the different ways of thinking, then there is less of that fuck everything about you, everything about you is terrible. And I think that maybe some of those women who are very misandrist, if they could understand that there is a respect for their way of being, then maybe they could start to also then respect the male way of being. I don't know. Cherry's giving me a look. But
a very, very skeptical look.
But the thing is, I think it's kind of part of bringing those things together, is understanding that there are roles that are that it's okay to be a certain way that is different. It's okay to be different because there's a give and take, and I think that if they could then recognize because everything they see as negative about males, that whole violence and cutting things off and looking at things simplistically, and you can see from their perspective that they're trying to say, you just look at everything as oversimplified. You just you want to remove everything, and you don't you want to just say only one thing is the best, and you just want to keep moving forward, and you have these simple ideas, and that is that feminine perspective, and they have a sort of kind of point from a certain perspective, but then from the male perspective, it's like, oh yeah, but except you're just going off in a million different directions and not valuing anything over anything else, and so you're completely incapable of moving forward. There's no your system will just implode on itself because of overhead and not actually picking one thing to go with and one thing that's better than anything else. And so if there is a I don't know. I think that if we can have that mutual respect and understanding of these two different perspectives, that perhaps a bit of the of this hatred that's starting to tear us apart can start to go away. I don't know.
I would agree with that, having that sort of approach, or rather communicating that on a larger societal level would actually help. But my skeptical look had to do with the fact that the more rabid, the 3.0 feminists, the radical feminists specifically, see any kind of show of respect or any kind of capitulation as weakness, and they pound even harder. So that's one of the ways in which it would have to be done on a global level. But I also think that we have a lot of emphasis placed on empathizing with women, on thinking about female troubles, their perspectives. That's a really huge thing in our society for men and women. Men specifically are conditioned in that way. Because I was about to say that what we can do to move on from this nastiness is to have empathy coupled with reason. And in that way, both genders should be able to, or at least the female, the Kali Yuga can end. The female raging Kali monster that is, part of it is in the toxic rabbit feminism. That thing may be pacified if we kind of move on with empathy and reason. However, we have a tremendous amount of empathy towards women as it is. I'm not saying to stop it. I'm just saying it's there. We're doing it. It's been on everybody's mind for the longest time ever. All outlets are talking about women and needs of women and desires of women. What women want was like 30 years ago, and they were already making stuff about that. Or 40, I don't even know how long it's been. But where is the same amount of emphasis on empathy with men? So
you make a very good point. It's true that maybe that will help is pointing out the ways in which men have been empathizing with the female perspective, how there has been concessions made. Maybe we can just point that out to the feminists and say, look, where are your concessions? Where is the meeting in the middle? Where are you going and saying, hey, this is what I see as valuable about men, because I don't see your way of valuing men. You see our way of valuing women, and we don't see your way of valuing men.
I mean, especially since the biggest part of what feminism, kind of how the rabid toxic feminism tries to cover itself is by saying, hey, look at the dictionary definition and look at all these reasonable people who just want everyone to be happy. They're basically egalitarians. But hey, no, that's feminism. Feminism is for equality. So if people are sticking to those guns as feminists, that is a brilliant way of being like, why are you not doing your part? We've been doing our part as men. Look, there's all these 10,000 ways in which we empathize and we understand. And soldiers put on shoes that are high-heeled shoes, for fuck's sake. They had to spray paint them red and wear them. It's mind-boggling, but we have all these empathy exercises that have to do with women, and we don't have any empathy exercises that have to do with men. And for people who stick with feminism as equality movement idea, they need to be told that. It's like, where's your half? What are you doing? Now, this brought me back to something that we got cut off in the middle of, but we're talking about Warren Farrell. He has the two things that he was doing for women is like objectification is a big deal. So he was giving guys tasks that would make them feel like they were objectified, like a woman would. So they kind of got to experience the female experience. And for men, what the women were given for like the male experience to empathize with that, they were given one of 150 rejection scenarios, because dealing with rejection is one of the biggest things that men actually have to face all the time. And bringing back around to how we can help men, how as women, as egalitarian women, women specifically women, I'm calling out to you girls, women who want to bring about equality of the genders or want to be equal to both in terms of love and empathy and appreciation. What we can start doing is literally giving men physical attention and approaching them first. It doesn't matter for what or how or where. Just try to reduce your criticism of men. I mean, you'll be amazed at how well that'll work for a variety of things in your life and their life, and they also won't fuck shit up. Because that's like one of the fears, right? You have to constantly criticize men because they don't know what they're doing, they're stupid, and us women are much smarter. I mean, look at that dad husband who's from a commercial, who's stuck in the blinds trying to figure out how the air conditioning works. Like, we're inundated with criticism of men, and we are forbidden from criticizing women. And I think we just need to chill the fuck out on criticizing men and maybe look inward, or maybe not look anywhere, but try to just be happy and move on and make somebody else's life happy by just smiling and being pleasant. I don't know, it's just a fucking thought. But I think I went back to this point to finish off the Warren Farrell thing I realized was left in the middle of that. But going back to what feminism, if people who believe that feminism is an equality movement, you can absolutely tell them, look, men are doing our part, where's your part? Where are you trying to cut men slack? Where are you trying to experience the male experience? Where are you listing things that hurt men or that men experience differently, or their feelings or their experiences? Where is that? Show me that. It doesn't happen anywhere except in the men's rights movement. And feminism tries to say that it helps men too. Well, how? Show me. Where?
Yeah, where is the empathy? And that's really what men are missing is, where is that empathy that's supposed to be there?
Exactly. But I think if the feminist group, if we're talking about the 3.0 web warriors, the social injustice warriors, a lot of them have adopted Dworkin's ideas and some other anti-sex bigots ideas that have to do with men being bad. Period. It doesn't to them. That's not going to help. That is like men are being empathetic. They're like, so what? The patriarchy. Of course, they should be empathetic. Why should we give any attention to any male stories? Because the patriarchy. Like everything ever, always is about men and their privilege. So why would we ever need to show that from our camp? And those are the two different types of feminists that you often deal with. And the majority is actually people who believe feminism is equality. They're trying to do good. They're coming from a good place, and they're like, oh, feminism, everything that's good and bright in the world that cares about people, I'll sign up to that. But they don't actually see what feminism in its current iteration is doing, and the hate and the vitriol towards men specifically that is being spewed. And so the other small vocal minority, they are different mentally, I think. I think we need to have a more I don't know if de-brainwashing is the right thing, but it's re-education, that's the word. Re-education of their basic approach towards humans. I think what we're dealing with, of course, cluster B personalities are very common among the more vocal, dramatic, just out of their fucking minds feminists on the internet, people who clearly have mental disorders. But I think there's a wider or more general level of a mental disorder that women, I think, suffer from a lot more than men, but it's starting to creep in there too because of the way we raise our children. There's a lack of understanding that other people are real and that they have feelings and they're just like you. That the empathy process is something that is very lacking, I think, in people. I mean, women do care about emotions in a lot of ways, and they will stay quiet at times to not rile the group. So they do have more like communal, conformist sort of behaviors that have to do with group cohesion. But I think that also leads to this issue that I'm discussing.
Perhaps that's also why it is that it seems that there's many more of the general populace of women listening to those small radical outliers than there are the general populace of men listening to the small radical outliers within our group. In other words, when a guy comes forward and says some really sexist things, most men are just they scoff at it. And whereas when within the female group, when you have that radical that says some really sexist things, women are like, oh yeah. So it's like maybe that's part of the mechanism. I don't know, but maybe we need to point that out somehow. That's like, hey, we're not listening to our outliers. Why are you listening to your outliers?
Yeah, at the same time, anyone involved in men's issues who says anything outrageous gets boosted, gets blasted out to everybody, and the more radical, extreme feminist gets kind of shushed up and pushed down.
Well, even people who aren't men's rights activists, who specifically claim they're not men's rights activists, are still being written about as men's rights activists. Like Christopher Nolan, whatever, is a prime example. He specifically said he hates the men's rights movement. He thinks they're a bunch of pussy faggots, and he doesn't want to be associated with them. And he advocated for, like beating women or whatever in some context. And there were newspapers or newspapers on the internet, as they are nowadays, coming out with men's rights activist says we should kill women. Are we back to the yellow papers, or this is the 40s? Like, what is happening? What's with the clickbaits, yo? But I would like to wrap up, I guess, with a ways of managing stress. We've elucidated some things here that I think we can do as women, specifically on the societal level, or as men as well, that can actually help bring about a calming of this, like the feminist beast, and try to like not get people sucked into its maw, and maybe like, hey, I know it's hard to tell people to do some research for themselves. That's not going to fucking happen. They're going to go to the dictionary. It says, oh, look, it says it's an equality movement. I was right all along. And of course, the no true Scotsman fallacy, something that comes out whenever they are presented with evidence of women that are feminists being extremely rabid, and they're like, oh, that wasn't a true feminist, that was just a random person. It's like, yes, except you also didn't look at the literally 20 other pages of all the other not real feminists talking about the exact same thing. So it can be stressful. It's very difficult, I think, for a lot of men who are on the verge of that Gitao thing, men going their own way. They see the cards stacked against them. It's really fucking stressful. It sucks. So I would advocate law of attraction, do some positive thinking, it'll do wonders for you, and exercise. But those are just my thoughts. Here are some that have to do with studies and surveys of people men and women, who mention how they manage their stress. So women are far more likely than men to say that they read to manage stress. And they in general report more stress management activities that connect them with other people, like spending time with friends and family, and going to church or religious services. So for women, being in communal groups or reading apparently really helps them relax and take the stress away, unless unfortunately you're one of those gender atypical women for whom communities and groups is the source of stress. But men are more likely than women to say they play sports as a way of managing stress. So they're also more likely than women to say that they don't do anything to manage stress. Once again, we have an underdeveloped field of male depression, male anxiety, male stress. Men have different ways of coping with things, as we see just so far. And exercise, physical activity, getting some of that blood flowing, some of that adrenaline, actually will boost testosterone levels. It'll help you deal with some of that emotional slump that comes from having lower testosterone. So exercise, sports, whatever, it's a great thing to do. And it is also, if you notice, a generally communal activity. There are very few sports, other than swimming, I guess, and like maybe golf, but there's very few sports that you are not in a group with other men. And I think that's another thing that we really need to advocate very strongly for, the return of male-only spaces. I think we have female-only spaces, therefore where are our male-only spaces? Men need them just as much as women need them. So another thing is that significantly more women than men exercise only once a week or less. So and when they don't exercise more often, they're likely to say, more than men, when asked, like, why don't you exercise more often? They're likely to say that it's because they feel tired. So there seems to be kind of a female approach to not really pushing themselves physically. So they're like, oh, well, I'll only exercise once a week. I don't really care. I don't need it. And then, why don't I exercise more? Oh, I'm just tired. Like, it's kind of not necessarily a babying behavior, but there is kind of a lack of self-discipline. I'm using harsh words, but you know what I'm trying to express. That is kind of a taking care of self, to not push through extreme physical issues or exercise. And when you feel tired, you're like, oh, well, I'll just not do anything because I feel kind of tired today. While men don't have the same kind of experiences. They do push themselves to go out and exercise, and when they're too tired, well, tough shit. Like, you're too tired all the time, but you have to get up and provide for the family anyway. So it's something that I think we're seeing more among women, or we'll start seeing because of how just shitty the economy is getting, and that people in America now are having to work 2 or 3 jobs to just make ends meet. Single mothers, single fathers, often actually both parents having a job that takes them away all day, and people are extremely underslept, extremely tired, but men still have this kind of drive to push through physical tiredness in order to achieve the desired result, while women seem to kind of coddle themselves physically, but they perhaps push themselves more emotionally, or rather react to their own emotions more and realize that they might be depressed, that they might have a problem, while men just tend to kind of shut those things away and put them aside emotionally and not really push through perhaps the emotional pain. So I think we've been conditioned, or just probably are naturally that way, and then also develop systems around it that conditioned it into a feedback loop where we have women being kind of in the emotional, pushing through emotionally in a variety of ways. So they have higher higher highs and lower lows of emotion, while men push themselves physically but kind of neglect their emotional side, and women neglect their physical side. Now, we also have here that men, well, while both genders cite lack of willpower as the very first barrier to change, women are more likely than men to cite lack of willpower as a barrier preventing them from making a lifestyle or behavior change recommended by a healthcare provider. So this is, I didn't read these beforehand. I mean, this feeds right into what I was just saying, that it does seem to be a bit of a coddling on the female side of themselves to not push through physical aspects, or maybe they're, just more feminine and don't have that really strong linear drive to accomplish something, even if it will mean that your health will suffer. So that's kind of interesting. And women are far more likely than men to say they lack that lack of willpower also has prevented them from changing their eating habits. So often here we keep seeing this idea of willpower that women think that they don't have, or they cite that as evidence of why they're not doing something that a doctor prescribed them, or that'll change the way they look, etc., while men actually do take action. And so I think a lot of that has to do with the ways in which men and women are treated in society and their kind of roles or their values, and also what they tend to do. And as we were talking about in the very beginning, men have that hunting, going after that thing drive, while women have like sitting around and chatting with friends and grooming as part of society building on that front. So physicality isn't necessarily as important, but we can see here that a lot of that can feed into this body positivity, which I'm all for body positivity if it goes all ways. if it's about healthy, natural, bigger, smaller, whatever, if it's within healthy limits, I'm all for body positivity for both men and women, big-breasted women, small-breasted women, all of them. But a lot of times this word body positivity is being used in association with not often, but frequently morbidly obese people, people who have developed sleep apneas and that they can't breathe when they're sleeping because of their weight. They're severely restricting their heart and a variety of health issues. It seems like this willpower idea that's associated with men, I guess more than women, at least self-reportedly, it seems that feeds into this potential lack of exercising even for the health reasons. So I mean, what do you guys think we can do to help women have more willpower, or think of something as willpower that they might not be thinking of before? How to approach that whole thing for their health? And also, I think it's important to have the sort of willpower that we're talking about here in order to help other people, including men, including other women, and just to be a better freaking person. I think women do need more willpower. I think as a society we do baby girls and women, and we do cut them a lot of slack, and we tell them to, it's okay, take the day off, you've had such a rough time, but nobody pays attention to what men are doing. So why aren't we being equal in doling out of pats on the back and relaxation tickets to the spa?
Well, I think part of the problem with the body positivity thing is that there's a difference between seeing yourself as a work in progress or seeing yourself as just a thing that's already complete and good as it is. And I don't think that I think that we need to recapture the idea of being a work in progress and being okay with not being done, not being finished, not being perfect, because that's what they're trying to say with body positivity is you're perfect as you are, and that's just not true. But at the same time, what is wrong with, just like when we were children, we had things to improve, and that in no way limited our value, and that we need to return to that childlike perspective that, of course, you're a work in progress. Of course, you're not absolutely perfect. Of course, you have things that you want to improve, and you need to be okay with that so long as you're taking action to move in that direction. You shouldn't be okay with it if you're not taking any action to move in that direction, because that's an unhealthy way of being. If you're not doing something to move forward and to make your life better and make yourself healthier, then you are not, that's not a good way of being. It is good to be satisfied with the fact that you're a work in progress. It is good to be satisfied with that you're doing what you can, and that knowing that you have limitations and trying to work within them, and being satisfied of that there are things that have held you back and have put you in the position that you're in, and you should be happy with that and understand it, but at the same time also recognize that it perhaps is not the best that it could be. Maybe it's the best that you can do because of limitations. That's fine, whatever. But at the same time, this idea that body positivity should be like this acceptance, complete acceptance of exactly as it is when you're morbidly obese and you're sick and you're unhealthy. That's just a very, it's a regressive viewpoint. It is making someone give up basically by saying, oh, there's nothing you can do, you're done, you're finished, you're a finished work, you're perfect as you are. No, you're not. Nobody's a finished work. Everybody is continuing to work on themselves, because that is the state of being. When you're green, you're growing. When you're ripe, you're rotten. And so you have to be able to, if you can believe in that progress, believe in your efforts, believe in that you'll continue to improve your efforts, you'll continue to try new strategies, you'll continue to learn new things, you'll continue to grow. If you can believe in that, and that is as the perfect state, that ever-changing state is the only perfect that really exists. That's the only finish that could ever exist, is that constant state of change, that constant state of adaptation, that constant search for improvement, and that is not an all-consuming search, but a satisfaction with doing what you can.
Yeah, I think that in combination with it basically requires a balance. We're not saying obsessively go after every single thing, and we're also saying don't just sit on your ass. Like, think about your life. Think about yourself as a person. Think about your future. Think about who am I? What am I doing here? And not in a existential angst sort of way, but in a practical way. Like, okay, well, this is my life. This is what I'm doing. These are things I might want to do. What do I need to achieve them? I mean, accept a more masculine way of thinking in that sense, because we do also need a balance towards the more masculine way of thinking in terms of being effectual and reasonable, logical, and being able to follow through with goals, and not just sort of live in the world of emotion and words, but like actually accomplish some things. And I think because of having gender atypical women a lot more out there and in public eye too, we get to see women doing this, taking the active role. And my most inspirational thing to me is seeing women who refuse to be infantilized and victimized by feminism. Women who say, no, I am not a victim. I am a person who may have gone through some things, but so does everybody else. This kind of empathy towards humanity and a level of understanding your place in the world, and not being kind of in a narcissistic cloud that all children at some point are in. I think a lot of what feminism teaches is to remain in that infantilized cloud. And I think that is, as somebody in chat mentioned, that is one of the biggest things I think we can do, is to help women kind of get better at things they clearly want to get better at, but they just don't think they have the willpower to do it. And also, in the same breath, to kind of get rid of ideas that are holding them back. Feminism is one of those ideas. It's an idea that you're not in control of your life, that everything is done to you all the time, and men are doing the doing, and women have no doing abilities, and you're just supposed to sit there and take it. That's your role as a woman. Of course, they decry that we need to change that, but they don't say anything other than that. And that really brings me to, one of the greatest things that I took away from Mother Teresa's teachings, is that she said, if you invite me to an anti-war rally, I will never come. Invite me to a pro-peace rally, and I'll be there. And that really elucidates the law of attraction as I see it, the power of positive thinking, a self-fulfilling prophecy in a positive spectrum. Be pro stuff instead of anti stuff. And since feminism a lot of times focuses on nothing but negativity. It reiterates all these negative ways of viewing women that are not true, provably not true, but they intentionally blind themselves to reason and to any kind of ability to back away from their point. They don't want to have a debate. It is their God-given truth that this is reality. And it's a very immature, narcissistic way of looking at the world, and I would really like to see us as a society, as humans, both men and women, who experience this sort of narcissistic cloud situation where they externalize all the problems onto others. It's like, obviously the world around you has an effect on you, but what are you going to accomplish blaming the world? Like, that's not going to actually give you a strategy of improving your life. So yes, you can look at what happened and how you could possibly avoid that in the future, but a lot of times in life we're just bumping into each other at high speeds or low speeds or whatever. People are just being and flailing. It's like reality is a big fucking mosh pit and everyone is just doing their thing. So I think we need to be aware of that, and that our experience as a woman, as a feminist, as whoever you are, that your experience is not special. You're not a special snowflake, but you are, but you're not, because there's like 7 billion other people that are going literally through the same stuff. And they also, the thing is, they feel the same way about reality that you do. And if that doesn't give you some modicum of empathy and the golden, use the golden rule. I mean, feminists, please, can we just use the golden rule? Treat people how you want to be treated. That's it. That's it. I think if we just give people that little mental exercise of like, well, would your gender like to be treated this way? I think that might start to change things. But we need to be active and vocal. And it's hard because social punishment is the #1 thing that is going to happen. And it's fucking scary because to our primate brain, it means we are being removed from the group. Therefore, there's no shelter, there's no protection, and no breeding opportunities. That means death. So your genes are like, oh my God, no, I don't want to die. You're like, no, calm down, instincts. We're living in a different world, different environment. We're overpopulated anyway, so like, who cares if you have kids or not? You're not gonna fucking die. Not having kids does not equal like death anymore. You can live on and have a legacy in a variety of other ways, beyond just simply existing. So if we can use that golden rule and apply that to people and try to tell them about being equal and empathetic and good to each other, regardless of labels. Forget feminism, MRA. Like, I don't even care. Like, well, I do care about MRA, but point is, just try to be. Forget labels. Try to level with people, because people react to labels. They put up walls whenever they see a particular label. So you have to approach them as another human, and some people will not be human, and you just have to move on and be like, all right, I'll find someone else. But you have to brave that social pain, and it is fucking hard. But one of the beauties of having integrity and a strong voice and refusing to bend under social pressure is that you're a beacon. You will attract light. You are light. I mean, you will attract other light. You will attract other people. Those who are doubting will see your stance and go, oh wow, if he can do it, maybe I can too, and they will join over. Or people who are not doubting and are still in their mind control throes of feminism, or thinking that it's some sort of equal thing, they will see your stoic stance and they'll be like, well, why is he so sure about this? Like, maybe I need to research and look into this. That alone, being an example, and talking out and speaking out and not caring about social repercussions, as long as you're doing it from a humane, kind, empathetic fucking perspective, don't go being an asshole, all right? But if you come at it from that perspective, people will get a lot more interested in the topic, rather than saying feminism is evil, even though it is. But a lot of people shut off their brains because they've associated feminism with something good and pure, and you're just a boogeyman to them. You suddenly become a faceless thing. You've stressed them. You've you've turned them into, so that would be my advice on how to deal with feminism. And if anyone else has anything to add about dealing with stress or dealing with feminist ideas, if that is a big part of stress in your life, or maybe, if Kat wants to weigh in on something that she would like to see as being someone who's not necessarily partial to the feminist MRA situation, I would love to hear that as we wrap up here.
Well, instead of having radio silence, I can mention I've got two studies here that I guess we could put somewhere in the show comments or something, just to kind of have some of that perspective on. Like I've got a study on lesions in the medial preoptic area and bed nucleus of stria terminalis. Anyway, it's basically the effects of copulatory behavior in animals, and then how then I've got a second study that shows that social defeat stress actually impacts that area of the brain. So basically, I'm just there's two studies that kind of to kind of bring back that whole stress and sexuality and how these things are interconnected, and how basically by forcing men to be less sexual, or basically by stressing men in a certain way and like expecting that to be a expecting men to be less sexual. I don't know. I think that's basically you're asking them to be in a less healthy state, and that's kind of a thing that's a constant. But at the same time, I guess that's not directly related to what I'm saying here, which is just basically how social defeat stress does actually impact our sexuality in a way that makes for more feminized behaviors. Like specifically, you can actually force animals into a feminine perspective, and so I think there's kind of a direct forcing of men into the more feminine role, and that's basically eliminating the masculine. There's we've got systems that are in place now, social systems that are kind of collapsing and destroying everything that is masculine instead of respecting it and valuing it. So anyhow, those two studies should be something interesting for anyone who wants to do some reading afterwards or something.
But as people who deal with depression and stress, like both you, James and Kat, what would be your parting words to people who might be dealing with some of the same stuff?
Oh, that's a big, big ask. Avail yourself of the help that is out there. Often it's inadequate, often it's difficult to get, but it is out there. Force yourself, despite your misgivings, to confide in people. Start with the ones that you are more certain you can trust, and then that will help you build your confidence for other things. Don't be too afraid of the pills. I know I gave a lot of horror stories about them, but it's absolutely not my intention to put people off them. They can help, but it's got to be in concert with other things. For guys in particular, I think it really helps us to have ideas of goals, things we can accomplish to help deal with what's going on with our stress and with our depression. So it can be helpful to make a big list of everything that you can think of that's causing you stress in your life, or things that are making you down. I mean, depression doesn't really work like that, but the more things you can take out of your life or modify that are causing you trouble, the better. And I think for men, having something to work on, a goal, really helps. It gives you something to fixate upon. So those would be the kind of things that I would suggest. But everyone's different. You've got to find out what works for you. So you've got to experiment in your own life and with your own mind. And that's ultimately the best advice, is to find what works for you and do it.
I agree with James. I should have gone first. He's way more eloquent than I am. But loneliness is one of, if not the highest cause of suicide. So, don't be afraid to talk to someone, to find someone that you can confide in and share with. We're pack animals. We're not meant to go through life alone. So don't let yourself do that. And also, don't be afraid of the drugs. They can be very, very helpful. Make sure you find someone, a professional, a doctor that you can talk to who will listen to you. Don't get my psychiatrist who you're in for 30 seconds and go home. And definitely have a goal. I worked with one therapist who told me, if the only thing you do for the day is get up and put some makeup on, do that. And it's true that just doing that, I mean, once you're ready, it's a lot easier to tackle the next thing. So set a goal and then see what happens from there. Usually once you tackle the first goal, it's much easier to tackle the second goal.
Yeah, I think the going after goals is a really uh, good thing to do. I mean, a lot of times, like for instance, I like to do things with my hands, making small things or what have you. But one of the things that I felt, if you're wanting to avoid the drugs as much as possible, one of probably the best thing you can do is get out there and exercise, and it's really some of the best gains are seen in when you stress yourself in exercise. Now, of course, don't if you have some weight issues or anything like that, you don't want to overstress your heart first time you go out there. I know sometimes as guys we tend to just like oh, maybe I can fit like 3 years of exercise into one routine, but work up to it. But getting out there and just running is one of the things that is personally helped me. I've got some chronic pain issues and things like that that are difficult, and going through the running and stuff that really does a lot. And then there's a lot of nutritional things that can help with depression as well. Just getting into nutrition can really make a big difference. Understanding the nutrition from a scientific standpoint, like for instance, the Oregon University website, Linus Pauling Micronutrient Information Center is a great place to start if you want to learn about the science behind nutrition. Just reading through their articles will really give you a good perspective, and a lot of those things you'll find. What's interesting is there are a lot of different micronutrients that can really impact your mental health. Like just having the right magnesium and calcium balance can be a factor. There's of course some of the B vitamins, really huge factor in mental health. Like for instance, just supplementing niacin can make a difference in some people. So if learning about those things, then there's also getting the right kinds of fats, like with coconut oil is a good way to if you're trying to do things through nutrition, look into coconut oil. It does come down to self-educating and knowing and testing what's going to work for you. But yeah, I can't. The one thing that is when you can't do anything else, I really recommend heat therapy. Heat therapy is when you can push into that area where you start to feel anxious and with heat, and you have to take deep breaths and drink a lot of water and things like that. That actually there's things called heat shock proteins. There's release of kappa opioids. There's a wide variety of systems that are hit by just heat therapy, and that's one of the things that almost anyone can do when you can't do anything else. You can't get out there and exercise. You can't get your hands on the things that you need in the way of health food, etc. One thing you can do is get into a hot tub and work on that heat stress on a regular basis, and that can make a really, really huge difference in your mental outlook. It takes roughly about a week for it to have a significant impact that you can see, so don't give up on it immediately. You're not going to notice it within the first day, but if you can push past your stress level in a heat therapy thing, you will see some changes in your drive and your ability to move forward, your ability to accomplish, and your overall satisfaction and outlook on life. And so that would be my recommendations on that. And I think that going back to trying to pull it back to the sexuality aspect, I think that the one of the things that when you can get those systems right, you actually will see a difference in sexuality as well. In other words, it's don't let anybody tell you that sexuality is unhealthy. And that's something that's kind of been part of our whole culture's drive in so many different ways, is to drop shame on it. Whereas they find that when you're still within when your body believes that you're still a viable breeding individual, that means that you're that genetically speaking, in other words, if you look at it from like the selfish gene kind of perspective, that says to your genes that you are still a contributing factor that needs to be kept. You're not something that needs to be gotten rid of. And so you'll find that there are a lot of different ties between other health aspects and your libido. In other words, when one set of health is down, the libido is down. And so, whenever people are trying to make you ashamed of libido, basically they're trying to make you ashamed of being healthy. And so don't buy into that crap. Yeah, I guess that's all I've got.
Well, that's great. Speaking of baths, I'm gonna go take one myself in just a little bit. But before I sign off, one quick thing that was mentioned in chat, which I'm really glad you guys brought this up. In terms of nutrition, yes, coconut oil was mentioned. The number one thing I would say is get rid of your sugar if you can. If you can substitute refined sugar with fruit, honey, stevia, any of those, stevia especially if you have any kind of inclination for diabetes, it is freaking amazing. Please do that. But what is even more important to our conversation on depression specifically is probiotics. The gut bacteria, the gut situation in general is fascinatingly involved with your mental state. You wouldn't think that your gut has anything to do with it, but the dwarves, they got it right. Like, you need to gestate a while after eating. You got to make sure your gut does the thing. It's from a Salvatore book. But anyway, it's really, really important to make sure that you have the right flora and fauna, which it's not really. Fauna is just mainly, well, wait.
Yeah, it's flora and fauna.
Well, what are bacteria, though, is the question. Are bacteria flora or are they fauna? But anyway, it's a tangent. We have a lot of bacteria in the gut that are actually really helpful for pulling nutrients and vitamins out of your food, little of it that there is in your food. But it is also very important for outgoing behavior. They've actually done studies on rats who had all of their bacteria from the gut removed entirely. So they had no biodome there, and they would sit in the corner, not go out, avoid bright spots. They would just sit in darkness. You're basically your basic depressed archetype, while having healthy bacteria in your stomach actually allowed those mice to explore, go out in openly lit areas, basically be a lot more adventurous and outgoing. So in that sense, we sort of see a parallel between depression and happiness in that sense. You'll at least be able to go out more, because that's one of the biggest problems of depression. You can't make yourself do anything. So getting proper bacteria in your gut with using probiotics is extremely important. What I would recommend is, once again, stay away from the sugar, because that helps you breed candida yeast, which is not a helpful bacteria at all. In fact, it's one of its byproducts is like wood alcohol or something. But what you can do is take plain yogurt. And it doesn't, I don't think it matters what kind of plain yogurt it is, like Greek or like whatever. Usually there is some lactobacillus, anyway, one of those bacteria that has to be, they used to make acidophilus yogurt, so you could get that. I don't think they do it anymore. They also mix it with sugar, which is just stupid. But you can, I would recommend getting plain yogurt, doesn't matter what kind it is, and you can put some fruits in there to sweeten it up if it's like too much, or some honey. That's actually a really neat combination, plain yogurt and honey mix. Whatever you can do to get some of that plain yogurt. If that doesn't work, you can try a liquidier, drinkable version of yogurt that is not quite as sour. What we know in Russia as kefir, and you can actually find that in America now at like your local whatever. You can go to the milk yogurt kind of section, and there'll be these thingies called kefir. So that's full of probiotics. And another thing, if you just can't stand the sour thing, if you have like one of those systems that you just can't eat those, I would recommend, if you have it in your stores, or you could buy it online maybe from, well, I don't know if the store that you don't have in your city will deliver to your city, so never mind about the online thing, but there are places you can get Good Belly, and it is a name of juice, type, brand, whatever, and I bet you could Google that shit. And Good Belly is a variety of fruit drinks, juice type situations, but it's basically fermented juice. So they have a variety of flavors, and you don't have to, lock yourself to the plain white kefir or yogurt. You can go ahead and get some Good Belly, and that'll be super amazing and delicious. And also once in a while taking some Pepto-Bismol just for shits and giggles will also help out your overall funguses and other possible things that are encroaching on the healthy bacteria. So those are all the things I would recommend. Do all of them if you can. Do some of them. Also make sure you have fiber. It is extremely important. There's been research recently that came out that high fiber diet lead to proper gut microbes. Low fiber diet like practically completely depletes you of the appropriate gut bacteria, and damage is partially irreversible. So you will lose something a little bit permanently if you maintain a low fiber diet. So high fiber diet, kefir, plain yogurt, or Good Belly, any kind of, you can get probiotics in pills like Lacidophilus, Acidobacillus. I think I said those out. Yeah, I said those right. Okay. Some other ones. You could. Did I say it wrong?
Yeah, I don't think that was right, but I was just going to say, kind of as an aside of this, something that recently came out was there's something called human milk oligosaccharides. I think that's how it's pronounced. Basically, it's a type of glycan that is found in breast milk that is not digestible by the baby, but it is specifically made for helping the gut flora and fauna to develop. And then in addition to that, another thing that recently came out is microRNAs, which are part of the non-coding DNA that actually has a function in that used to be considered junk DNA. Some of the microRNAs in our genes are specifically for managing the gut biome. And reading about the gut biome is like, it's really important, because one of the things you find out is we have more DNA of other creatures that make up our total self than our own DNA. So it's a really, really huge part of our health and well-being. So yeah, that's all I've got to say.
So drink breast milk.
Yes, drink breast milk. There you go. If you got a problem with your gut biome, you just need some breast milk. We'll leave it at that.
To bring it back around to sexuality, get them titties in your mouth, all right?
That'll cure everything. Just get you some titties, and it'll all be good.
Finally, a diet I want to follow.
There you go. No crash diets on that one. So that's it. We're gonna leave you with titties in your mouth, and thank you for joining us for our second CherrySTEM show. And let me know in the comments below once they become available if you would like us to get into a lot more technical detail. Not really. Do you just hate it? Do you love it? Tell us all about it, and I'll try to cater some of the show topics and the depth of which we go into things to your liking, but ultimately it's our damn show, and we like to talk about nerdy things. So there's probably going to be a lot of nerdy things happening. So, all right, thank you guys very much. Thank you.
Hey, you want to do some like shilling? Like for instance, Kat needs to shill, and those are our guests, etc.
Yes, I forgot that's a thing. I'm just so used to not hosting the shows that somebody else takes care of the shilling.
It's terminology we use, Kat. It's whatever. We're basically talking about your personal projects and things like that, where people can look you up, etc. So yeah, if you want to give your website, Kat, then the listeners can look you up.
Which is weird that it's shilling, because isn't the definition of a shill?
It's really not a good word. It's just something within the honey badgers. We use that word, but it's really not the right way to use that word.
So yes, tell us stuff.
Well, you can find me on Twitter at Kitty Curiosity. That's Curiosity with a K. Or I guess you can just type in Catanomia. Pretty sure that also works and comes up. You can find me online at catanomiaxxx.com. And I'm a nerdy sex worker, kind of like Anna Cherry.
Very true. And we have sex work together. So you guys could check out her site or annacherry.com for videos that we've done, and they're great. And there's probably more coming up too once I update. So that's awesome. And what about you, James? Do you have any kind of upcoming projects or places people can find you that you'd like to add?
Best place to find me is postmortemstudios.wordpress.com. That's kind of my main hub of stuff at the moment. I write games, I write fiction, I dabble in erotica, that sort of thing. The main thing I've got going on at the moment is I run a scholarship in memoriam of a dead friend who did a lot of art for me. So I'm trying to raise money to give this scholarship to young artists who often, science fiction, fantasy artists who often have a hard time in college and university being taken seriously, or, and doing art. It's lots of people see that as throwing money away. So any little thing you can do to help people is good. So I've been raising money for a scholarship on that. At the moment, it's about only about $700, but that's a lot of ramen noodles. So you can find information about that on my site. If anyone wants to donate, there's about a week left on the fundraiser. And if anyone knows any young artists who are in high school, college, university, or are in reduced circumstances like long-term unemployed or disabled, these are all people who are eligible to apply. And I haven't had any applications yet, so I'm quite desperate for this year's one to find some people. You'd think giving money away, they'd show up. But unfortunately, they haven't. So if anyone knows any young artists or can just get the word out there for this last week of fundraising, I'd really, really appreciate it.
All right, cool. I'm gonna mention my project. I've got too many different projects, too many irons in the fire. I'm actually working on a book, but if anybody wants to, who's interested in physics and that sort of thing, I've got something called called steampunk physics. Unfortunately, the only thing I've got available really right this moment is a collection of videos I did kind of overnight. It's you can just look up steampunk physics. It's on YouTube, and I've got a lot of other things like on Quora, etc. But I'll have a more cohesive, singular site for some interesting physics stuff that's part of my project. If anybody's interested in that sort of thing.
That sounds awesome. Thank you guys very much for joining me and for hanging on a whole hour and a half extra. Sorry, James, for keeping you up all night. I mean, that's what I do. So thank you so much, guys, for joining me on the show, and thank you everyone for tuning in. And we will see you guys next month.